Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're continuing with the next part of this epic time chamber series. My name is Ash. Please, for me, drop a like, join the Patreon, and subscribe to the page. Also, leave your comments down below. With that, let's begin.
Cross my heart in hopes to die. Welcome to my dark side.
In the dimly lit confines of the Time Vault, Lord Beerus and Frieza stood before a display containing 6 shimmering time rings. Each ring seemed to hum faintly with an otherworldly energy, representing the 6 timelines born from pivotal splits in the flow of history. The rings, resting within their ornate display case, exuded an aura of mystery and immense power. Beerus moved forward, his steps measured and deliberate. His golden eyes narrowed as he opened the vault's secure box. Without hesitation, he reached in and carefully removed one of the rings. The artifact glinted in the pale light as Beerus slipped it onto his finger. He studied it briefly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. With this, his first objective was complete. Satisfied, Beerus turned and began heading for the exit. But just as he was about to leave, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the chamber, stopping him in his tracks. The scream was one of pain, raw and unrelenting. Beerus turned sharply, his eyes locking onto Frieza. The tyrant was doubled over, clutching his hand. A second time ring, now glowing fiercely, was on his finger. The artifact throbbed with violent pulses of energy, sending arcs of lightning through Frieza's body. His knees buckled under the force, and he collapsed to the ground, trembling. "Frieza," Beerus said, his voice cold and unimpressed. "What are you doing?" Frieza's teeth clenched as he struggled to speak. This ring, he was cut off by another surge of energy that racked his body, forcing a guttural cry from his lips. He clawed at the ring with trembling fingers, desperate to remove it, but it was as if the artifact had fused with him, refusing to budge. "What is this?" Frieza roared through gritted teeth. His face was a mask of agony, his golden aura flickering erratically as his body began to fail him. "This accursed thing won't come off." The pain grew unbearable, the lightning targeting his internal organs. Frieza's breaths came in short, ragged gasps. His crimson eyes darted to his other hand as a horrific idea took root in his mind. I'll chop it off," he hissed, desperation overtaking reason. "If it's the only way to stop this pain, I'll sever my own arm." Before he could act on the thought, a thunderous voice broke through his torment. "Frieza, you fool!" Beerus snarled, his tone laced with disdain and anger. "Trying to take a time ring for yourself behind my back? Did I permit you to touch such divine artifact?" Frieza looked up, his face twisted in a mix of agony and indignation. "Permit me. I don't need your permission for anything," he snapped, though his voice was weak and strained. Beerus stepped forward, his expression dark and menacing. "Oh, but you do. These rings are not toys for the likes of you to tamper with. Time rings can only be worn by a Supreme Kai and their counterpart." His voice grew quieter, more menacing, "which means me. I may have lost my divinity, but I am still this universe's god of destruction. Mortal or not, my title remains intact. There are exceptions, of course, for reasons beyond even my understanding. Our trainees have been able to use the rings, though far less effectively." He paused, his piercing gaze locking onto Frieza's trembling form. "I should leave you to your fate," Beerus said coldly, his voice dripping with indifference. "It's slowly killing you. That's simply how it was designed. If someone unworthy of the title of Supreme Kai, or God of Destruction, dares to wear a time ring, it will destroy them, slowly, painfully. After all, time is not something to be tampered with." Frieza let out another anguished scream as the ring unleashed another jolt of energy, sending his body into violent spasms. His tail lashed against the floor as he clawed at the ring, his defiance crumbling into desperation. Beerus tilted his head, his expression calm yet filled with disdain. "Furthermore," he continued, "I'm still a god of destruction. Did you truly think I would stand idly by and allow you to break such a sacred rule?" Frieza clenched his jaw, his body trembling as he endured the agonizing punishment from the time ring. Despite the overwhelming pain, his pride refused to let him remain silent. He forced his crimson eyes to meet Beerus's stern gaze. "But you're planning to break that rule yourself, aren't you?" Frieza spat, his voice laced with both accusation and agony. The lightning continued to course through his body, and every word felt like a struggle. "Why else would you take the time ring for yourself?" Beerus let out a low growl, narrowing his eyes. "Weren't you listening, you insufferable fool?" he retorted, his tone sharp. "I am a god of destruction. That alone permits me to use the ring. Furthermore, I'm not planning on meddling with time. If I ever attempted such a thing, I would suffer the same fate as you are now. The ring does not discriminate, Frieza. It simply follows its design. Frieza managed to hiss through his teeth. Design or control? Beerus ignored the comment and continued, his voice calm yet firm, as though addressing a child who had just burned their hand on a stove. The Supreme Kais have certain privileges because their role demands it. They oversee mortals, past, present, and future. Their authority grants them the ability to make changes with consequences, yes, but not ones as severe as what would happen to me. My position as a god of destruction comes with limits. Do you understand that? Unlike them, I destroy to maintain balance. I don't toy with time. For a brief moment, Beerus' expression softened. His gaze shifted upward, almost wistful, as a memory of Whis flashed through his mind. He remembered the angel's serene demeanor, his cryptic hints about the past, and the paths that lay ahead. The flicker of emotion passed as quickly as it came, and Beerus' usual stern demeanor returned. I have my reasons for going back, he muttered, more to himself than to Frieza. Before Frieza could press further, Beerus snapped his attention back to the present. Enough talk, Beerus commanded, his voice like a thunderclap. He strode over to the kneeling tyrant, whose body was visibly shaking. Without hesitation, Beerus placed his hand over the glowing ring on Frieza's finger. Instantly, a surge of violet energy flowed from Beerus into the ring. The artifact responded to the energy of the god of destruction, pulsing rhythmically before finally loosening its grip. With a sharp gasp of relief, Frieza yanked the ring from his finger and tossed it away like a venomous snake. He collapsed onto the ground, his breathing heavy and labored. That will teach you not to touch things that don't belong to you, Beerus said with a smirk, turning on his heel. He began to walk toward the exit, his movements unhurried. Come, he called over his shoulder. We have far more pressing matters to attend to. Frieza staggered to his feet, his pride wounded more than his body. For once, he didn't offer a sarcastic remark or complaint. Silently, he followed Beerus, his steps uneven but determined. As they exited the time vault, Frieza placed a hand on Beerus' shoulder, signaling him to stop. Beerus didn't even glance back. He simply placed 2 fingers to his forehead, and in the blink of an eye, the two vanished into the void of space. The need for a ship was gone. Something about the time ring had completely revitalized Beerus. His energy, which had felt diminished for some time, now surged within him, stronger and steadier than ever before. Without effort, the pair traversed the multiverse, Beerus cutting through dimensions with precision as they sped toward their next destination. Ahead of them lay a planet where one being held the knowledge they sought, a being who knew virtually everything that had ever occurred across the multiverse, Master Zuno. Meanwhile, in Universe 6, a very different scene was unfolding. On the desolate surface of planet Neptune, chaos reigned. The sky was torn with jagged streaks of energy, casting an eerie glow over the battlefield below. The air was thick with tension and the raw scent of destruction. Standing amidst the rubble, Kefla, her green hair glowing with Super Saiyan energy, panted heavily. Beside her, the burly figure of Champa, the god of destruction for Universe 6, was locked in a life or death struggle. Their opponent, however, seemed unfazed. Mephistopheles, one of the primordial demon gods, stood tall, his presence exuding an oppressive power that made even Champa look small in comparison. His crimson skin glistened with an otherworldly sheen, and his eyes glowed with malevolent glee. Champa clenched his fist, his feline face twisted with frustration. He had tried everything, every technique, every ounce of his destructive energy. Nothing had worked. The worst of it was his last attack, a devastating Hakai Blast, his most powerful technique. It had been his trump card, his final gamble to obliterate the demon god, but it had failed. Not only had it failed, but it had also backfired in the worst way imaginable. Mephistopheles had absorbed the Hakai energy, his body swelling with newfound strength. The dark energy now coursing through him made him even more formidable than before. Champa's chest heaved as he glared at his foe, his mind racing. This can't be happening, he muttered under his breath. He had counted on the Hakai to end the battle, to erase the demon from existence. Instead, the attack had given Mephistopheles an edge he couldn't overcome. This is useless, Champa growled, his voice heavy with frustration as he hovered in the turbulent air. His body was battered, his energy reserves dwindling. He has too many unknown abilities. I hate fighting like this. The thought of losing to a foe like Mephistopheles enraged him. Champa's fists clenched, his cat-like ears twitching as he replayed the demon's earlier taunt in his mind. Mephistopheles had sneered, almost mocking him. "You're trying to harm a demon with your own energy." Champa's golden eyes narrowed as the words echoed in his thought. "What does he mean by that?" he muttered, his breath labored. "Is he saying he knows how to wield destruction energy too?" The notion sent a chill down his spine. If the demon god could truly manipulate Hakai energy, then every attack Champa launched would only serve to strengthen him. But before Champa could delve further into his thoughts, a sudden, dreadful sensation washed over him. His body felt heavier, weaker, as though a vital part of his power had been stolen away. His muscles trembled involuntarily. What is this?" he roared, panic creeping into his voice. "My strength, it's gone." The god of destruction barely had time to process the alarming loss of energy before Mephistopheles struck. Moving with terrifying speed, the demon god closed the distance and delivered a backhanded slap so powerful it sent Champa hurtling through the sky like a rag doll. Champa's body crashed into the planet's surface with the force of a meteorite, creating an explosion so massive it was visible from space. The impact carved a crater the size of a continent, dust and smoke billowing into the atmosphere as shockwaves rippled across the barren landscape. "Lord Champa!" Kefla's voice cracked with desperation as she forced herself to her feet. She was trembling, her energy almost entirely drained from maintaining her Super Saiyan 3 form. The immense strain was taking its toll, her muscles quivering as though her body were about to collapse under its own weight. "I must save him!" Kefla whispered fiercely, her voice filled with determination. Her eyes burned with fiery resolve, despite the condition of her battered body. She clenched her fists, mustering the last vestiges of her strength, and charged toward Mephistopheles. But the effort proved too much. As she surged forward, her energy gave out, and the glowing Super Saiyan 3 aura around her flickered and vanished. Worse still, the strain had overwhelmed the Patara earrings that bound her fusion. With a sudden jarring flash of light, the fusion between Kale and Caulifla shattered, splitting the two warriors apart. Both girls collapsed to the ground, utterly spent. Kale's breathing was shallow, her usually timid face frozen in a mask of despair. Caulifla, ever defiant, slammed a fist against the dirt, but couldn't summon the strength to rise. Their fusion had been the only thing keeping them in the fight, and now it was gone. The realization hit them like a death knell. The two Saiyan warriors could already envision their end, helpless against a foe far beyond their power. "This can't be happening," Caulifla muttered weakly, her voice trembling. "Not like this." Mephistopheles observed the scene with mild surprise, though the twist didn't concern him. The fusion had been an annoyance at best, not a threat. Still, the sight of the two girls reduced to trembling, powerless figures stirred something in the primordial demon god. A smirk spread across his face. "How pitiful," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "You were helpless before, and now you're not even worth stepping on." He raised his clawed hand, his crimson skin glowing faintly in the dim light. "Don't worry," he continued, his tone mockingly gentle. "I'll end your misery quickly." At his fingertips, a massive sphere of destruction energy began to form, swirling with chaotic power. The sphere grew rapidly, its violet glow casting an eerie light over the battlefield. The energy radiating from it was suffocating, making the ground tremble beneath its weight. Kale and Caulifla exchanged a glance, their eyes wide with terror. Their bodies were too drained to move. It felt as though they were bolted to the ground, their limbs refusing to obey their will. They could do nothing but watch as the massive ball of energy descended toward them. 3, 2, 1. Mephistopheles counted softly, savoring the moment. The destruction sphere struck the planet's surface, sending out a blinding flash of light. For an instant, it seemed as though everything would be annihilated. But then, something completely unexpected happened. The energy from the sphere began to swirl violently, as though it had been caught in a vortex. The light dimmed, and the chaotic destruction energy seemed to freeze in place, defying all logic. Even Mephistopheles' smug expression faltered, his eyes narrowing in confusion. What is this?" the demon god muttered, his voice tinged with unease. Lord Champa rose shakily to his feet, his body battered and weakened from Mephistopheles' relentless assault. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, and his breathing came in short, labored gasps. Yet his golden eyes burned with a ferocity that even the heavens would not dare challenge. The god of destruction had made his decision. He was going to use it, the technique he had sworn never to unleash under any circumstance. The ultimate power hidden within him, a forbidden move so devastating it came with an unpayable cost, his own life. There was no hesitation in his voice as he shouted, Multi-domain expansion. His raw power erupted in a blinding explosion of energy. The air itself trembled, bending and twisting under the weight of his unleashed might. Come forth, void of eternal obliteration. The sky tore apart, plunging the world into pitch-black darkness. Every star in the heavens vanished, swallowed by an endless abyss. The battlefield was no longer a place of fractured earth and burning skies. It had become a void, an enclosed space ruled by Champa's will alone. Caulifla and Kale, battered and bruised, looked up from the jagged crater where they knelt, their breath caught in their throats as they gazed upon the terrifying spectacle. Moments ago, they had believed they were at the end of their journey, powerless to stop the destruction headed their way. Now, they stared in stunned awe at Champa, who stood as their final hope. Champa's appearance had transformed. His once plump, feline feature had grown gaunt, his skin stretched tight over his frame, crackling with energy. A violent aura of black and violet flames raged around him, shrieking like tortured souls in a storm. His eyes, now twin orbs of blinding white light, burned with an intensity that made even looking at him painful. The air was thick with a dreadful sense of finality, and both girls realized the truth. Champa was sacrificing himself for them, for Universe 6. Lord Champa, Kale whispered, her voice trembling as she clung to Caulifla. Champa's voice cut through the heavy silence like a blade. Demon, he spat, his tone cold and unyielding. This domain is my final stand. Inside my multi-domain expansion, there is no escape. No help will come for you. Here, the laws of time and space bend to my will alone. Inside this void, I am a god among gods, and you are the unlucky fool who dared to be trapped here with me. High above, Mephistopheles hovered, his crimson eyes narrowing as he surveyed the warped reality around him. The primordial demon god, who had so easily absorbed Champa's strongest attacks moments ago, now seemed unsettled. The air around him was heavy and oppressive, an invisible force pressing down on him with each passing second. The planet's surface below them fractured further, splitting into massive cliffs that glowed faintly with destructive energy. The demon's lips curled into a strained smirk. You believe you can end me, false demon? Mephistopheles scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. You're nothing more than a pale imitation of true power, a child taking their first steps into the abyss. He extended a clawed hand, his aura flickering dangerously. Did you forget, Champa? I've already consumed your energy once. Whatever this pitiful trick is, if it's God Key, I can siphon it as easily as before. Champa didn't flinch. Instead, his aura surged outward in a violent pulse, sending shockwaves through the void. The crushing pressure rippled across the battlefield, splintering the ground into razor-sharp cliffs and jagged ravines. The sheer weight of his power slammed into Caulifla and Kale like a tidal wave. The two Saiyan warriors screamed, clutching each other as the overwhelming force pressed down on them. Their lungs burned, their ears rang, and the world felt like it was collapsing around them. What is this? Caulifla gasped, struggling to keep her footing as the ground beneath her cracked further. This power, it's unreal! Kale's wide eyes filled with tears as the oppressive energy made it hard to even breathe. I can't move, she choked out, clinging to her partner. Above them, Mephistopheles snarled, his smirk fading as the void's oppressive weight began to take its toll. The black flames surrounding Champa burned brighter, their edges laced with violet lightning that tore through the air like chains, snaring anything within reach. It was as if the god of destruction had opened a door to a place worse than death itself. The demon god snarled, his sharp fangs glinting as they dripped with a black, viscous energy that seemed alive. His crimson eyes darted around the suffocating darkness, his breaths growing more ragged with every passing second. He tried to step forward, his massive frame rippling with power, but the very air inside this cursed domain pushed back against him. Each step was a monumental effort, as though the void itself sought to crush him into nothingness. What is this magic? Mephistopheles growled, his voice tinged with frustration and disbelief. His clawed hands twitched as he struggled against the invisible force pressing down on him. No, this has to be a trick. His words were defiant, but his tone betrayed his rising unease. Champa remained silent for a moment, his skeletal form illuminated by the swirling black and violet flames that surrounded him. His energy pulsed like the heartbeat of a dying star, ominous and foreboding. Finally, he spoke, his voice hollow and distant, carrying the weight of finality. This is my multi-domain expansion. He raised a trembling hand, his aura flaring brighter with his words. It is not magic. and it is no trick. It is the end of all things. Inside this space, I am destruction itself. Your strength will mean nothing here. Your dark siphoning, useless. Your life will be drained away, moment by moment. Mephistopheles' eyes widened, his snarl faltering as he realized the weight of Champa's words. He tried to muster another defiant retort, but Champa's gaze flicked away from him, shifting toward Caulifla and Kale, who were still kneeling in the shattered remains of the battlefield. His eyes softened for just an instant, and his voice grew quiet. "Forgive me," he murmured, as though speaking across an infinite chasm. "I would never have used this technique if there had been any other way." Kale's trembling hands rose to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. She could feel it deep in her soul. The god of destruction's essence was slipping away. It was as if his very existence was being poured into the grim arena he had created. The air around her felt heavy, oppressive, and filled with an undeniable sorrow. "Lord Champa," she whispered, her voice shaking. "What are you doing to yourself?" She couldn't understand the full mechanics of what was happening, but she knew one thing with certainty. Champa was dying. The power required to sustain this technique was eating away at him, devouring his life force like a ravenous beast. Her heart ached to see the once proud god reduced to this, a sacrifice made for their sake. Caulifla clenched her fists, anger and despair warring within her. She pushed herself to her feet, though her body screamed in protest. Her knees buckled slightly, but she forced herself to stay upright. He's sacrificing himself," she said, her voice tight with emotion. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but her expression remained defiant. No, we can't just let him do this." Yet deep down, she knew there was nothing they could do. Their bodies were too battered, their energy reserves completely drained. All they could do was watch, powerless. In the distance, Mephistopheles spat a mouthful of blackened blood onto the ground. The toll of being within the multi-domain expansion was beginning to show. His towering form, once a symbol of overwhelming power, now seemed slightly hunched. His red aura flickered like a dying flame, and his movements had grown sluggish. He raised a clawed hand, summoning his destructive energy to strike back. But something horrifying happened. The energy he tried to summon flickered and faded, dissipating like smoke caught in a gust of wind. The demon god's eyes widened in shock. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. The domain wasn't just trapping him, it was draining him faster than he could regenerate. Even his dark siphoning, his most reliable weapon, was useless here. His power was slipping through his fingers, draining away like water from a shattered vessel. "No!" Mephistopheles growled, his voice trembling with frustration. He curled his hands into fists, his claws digging into his own palms. "This can't be. I am a primordial demon god. This shouldn't be possible." Desperate, he lunged at Champa, his monstrous body surging forward in a final attempt to end the god of destruction before his strength gave out entirely. His clawed hand sliced through the air, aiming directly for Champa's heart. But just as his strike was about to land, Champa's body vanished, dissolving into a flare of black and violet light. Mephistopheles' claw struck nothing but empty space. "What?" the demon god roared, his rage echoing through the void. In the blink of an eye, Champa reappeared behind him, his skeletal form moving with a speed and precision that defied logic. The god of destruction's fist glowed with an otherworldly light as he drove it into Mephistopheles' back with devastating force. The impact was catastrophic. The ground beneath them split apart, sending violent tremors across the void. The demon god's howl of pain was deafening. The strike didn't just bruise or break. It tore into Mephistopheles' very essence. A portion of his being dissolved into nothingness, unraveling under the weight of Champa's destructive power. He staggered forward, clutching at his chest as his crimson form flickered erratically. What is this?" Mephistopheles gasped, his voice filled with both fury and terror. His body trembled uncontrollably, and for the first time in eons, true fear shone in his eyes. Champa stood silently, his blazing aura casting long, eerie shadows. The void itself seemed to pulse with his dying energy, every moment bringing him closer to the edge. Champa's voice boomed like thunder, resonating across the suffocating void. "Within my void of eternal obliteration," he roared, his tone filled with unshakable resolve. "You do not simply lose strength, you lose the very right to exist." His words carried the weight of absolute finality, sending ripples through the swirling blackness of the domain. His breaths were heavy, each one taking more effort than the last. He could feel his life force burning away, consumed by the infinite destructive energy coursing through him. This was power he had always sworn to avoid, power that came at an unbearable cost. But now, with no other option, he had fully unleashed it. Caulifla and Kale clung to each other, their battered bodies trembling as they crouched on the fractured ground. The crushing pressure of the two titanic forces made the air almost impossible to breathe. They stared at Champa in a mixture of awe and terror. They wanted to cry out, to plead with him to stop, but the words caught in their throats. Deep down, they knew this moment had spiraled beyond their control. Champa, the proud, arrogant god who feared death more than anything, had chosen to become something else. He had shed his pride, his ego, and his fear, transforming into an unstoppable force of destruction, even at the cost of his own life. Mephistopheles, hovering unsteadily within the domain, snarled in both pain and frustration. His crimson skin flickered, parts of it fading and reforming as he struggled to withstand the relentless energy tearing him apart. His voice, once filled with smug arrogance, now trembled as he spat out his defiance. You would kill us both?" he growled, his sharp fangs bared in desperation. "You are a fool. Don't think I don't know the price of such power. But to sacrifice your only life as fuel? I never thought even you would stoop this low." The demon's eyes darted around, searching for any weakness, any gap in the domain's walls, but there was none. The oppressive void allowed no escape, no tricks, no time-warping abilities. Nothing could penetrate the unbreakable seal Champa had created. Champa lifted his skeletal hand, black flames swirling along his fingertips, their heat distorting the air around them. His voice was calm, almost serene. "I am no fool," he said. "I am a god of destruction, fulfilling my duty. You thought to capture me, didn't you?" His glowing eyes narrowed, his aura flaring brighter. "Perhaps you had your reasons, though I don't know what. But none of that matters now. You've made your choice. And now, demon, you'll pay the ultimate price." Mephistopheles hissed, his claws twitching as he prepared to defend himself. "I've made my peace with death," Champa continued, stepping forward, each movement precise and deliberate. "The question is, have you?" Before the demon could respond, Champa surged forward, his form flickering like a shadow through the void. His attacks came with devastating precision, each strike laced with an absolute eroding force. Mephistopheles recoiled, his crimson form shrinking back as chunks of his being dissolved into ash with every blow. "Gah!" the demon howled, the sound echoing through the oppressive darkness. The agony was unlike anything he had ever experienced. His mind reeled, his essence unraveling piece by piece. He tried to counterattack, to summon energy, but the void robbed him of even that. Every second inside the void of eternal obliteration felt like an eternity of suffering. Mephistopheles could feel his very existence slipping through his grasp, fading into nothingness with each passing moment. His confidence was gone, replaced by sheer desperation as he realized the full weight of Champa's resolve. Meanwhile, Caulifla and Kale remained huddled together, their faces pale and their eyes wide with shock. The crushing pressure of the domain pinned them in place, making even breathing a struggle. Around them, the sky was gone, replaced by swirling blackness, punctuated with flashes of eerie purple light. The ground cracked and shifted under their knees, the battlefield a warped and unstable plane of destruction. They watched in helpless silence, their minds racing with questions. "Is he really going to destroy himself?" Kale whispered, her voice trembling. Her eyes brimmed with tears as she gazed at the god who had once seemed untouchable, now pushing himself beyond his limits. Caulifla swallowed hard, her voice filled with a mix of rage and sorrow. He's really doing it," she muttered, her fists clenched tightly, her knuckles turning white. "He's sacrificing everything, for us, for this stupid universe." She trailed off, her voice cracking under the weight of her emotions. The memories came rushing back. Champa, always so arrogant, forcing them into tournaments for his own entertainment. The same god who risked their entire universe just to satisfy his ego in the tournament of power. The one who had once seemed incapable of caring about anyone but himself. And yet now, here he was, throwing everything away to protect them. Champa showed no sign of hesitation. His skeletal form radiated pure destructive energy, his black and violet aura burning brighter with each passing moment. He could feel his body shedding its mortal shell, piece by piece. The cost was unbearable, yet he pressed forward. He knew there was no turning back. Once the void of eternal obliteration was activated, it could only end with his death. That was its ultimate price, the reason he had never dared to use it before. But now, with no other options, Champa had made his choice. Mephistopheles howled, his voice raw with a mix of rage and desperation. echoing endlessly within the oppressive void. He lashed out wildly, his clawed hands tearing at the air, summoning what scraps of power he could muster. Crimson energy flared briefly around him, only to vanish into the endless blackness, devoured by the very domain that imprisoned him. His attacks found no target, no purchase. The primordial demon's chest heaved as he stumbled back, his form flickering. His once mighty aura had faded to a faint glow, and his limbs trembled under the weight of the void of eternal obliteration. Even his mind felt dull, the domain sapping his vitality, his strength, and even his ability to think. Mephistopheles had always relied on his cunning, but here, he was left with nothing. Champa's voice broke the silence, sharp and commanding, cutting through the suffocating darkness like a blade. "You thought yourself untouchable," the god of destruction said, his tone low and menacing. Each word seemed to reverberate through the void. "You fed on my energy, mocked my efforts, and dared to threaten those under my care. But in this place, your fate is sealed." Mephistopheles bared his fangs, attempting a sneer despite his growing terror. "You're just a dying flame," he hissed, though his voice lacked its former strength. "You'll burn out, and then I'll be free." Champa didn't flinch. Instead, his skeletal form stood firm, bathed in the black and violet flames of Oblivion mode. His eyes glowed like twin stars, devoid of mercy or hesitation. "There is no freedom for you here," he said coldly. Behind him, Caulifla and Kale crouched, their battered bodies trembling as they struggled to remain conscious under the crushing weight of the domain. Their breaths came in shallow gasps, and their eyes were wide with fear. They could feel it, the immense toll this technique was taking on Champa. Every moment seemed to drain more of his life force, and the blackened energy surrounding him felt like it was consuming him from the inside out. "Lord Champa," Kale whispered, her voice breaking. Tears streamed down her cheeks, her hands clutching at the cracked ground beneath her. He's really dying." Caulifla, gritting her teeth, managed to push herself to her knees. Her voice was hoarse, but defiant. "We can't just sit here. There's gotta be something we can do," she yelled, though her hands balled into fists of frustration. "We can't just let him." Her voice cracked, the weight of the moment crushing her resolve. Champa raised his trembling hand, his movements slow but deliberate. The air around him shimmered with destructive energy, spiraling and crackling like living flames. Each step forward seemed to cost him more of his strength, his bones creaking with effort. Yet his expression was calm, resolute. "You've stolen my energy, demon," Champa growled, his voice hollow and echoing, like the last rumblings of a dying storm. "But now the debt is paid in full. Your power belongs to nothingness." With those words, Champa clenched his fist, and the space around Mephistopheles erupted into a storm of spiraling destruction. The air shimmered and split apart, as though invisible blades were carving through the demon's very essence. "Stop!" Mephistopheles screamed, his voice breaking with panic. The once proud demon god lunged forward, his movements frantic and erratic. He clawed at the air, searching for something, anything to hold on to, but there was nothing. The void of eternal obliteration was absolute. No matter where he turned, there was only emptiness. The spiraling currents of destruction peeled away at him, layer by layer, as though his very existence were being unraveled thread by thread. "This can't be happening," Mephistopheles roared, his voice trembling as pieces of his crimson form dissolved into ash, carried away by the swirling winds of oblivion. His regenerative powers, his dark siphoning abilities, even his cunning, all were rendered useless. For the first time in eons, he was truly powerless. The demon god coughed violently, his once mighty form breaking apart, as though he were a brittle sculpture crumbling in slow motion. Jagged fragments of his body floated away into the endless void, like dust scattered in a windless vacuum. His crimson eyes were wide with terror, the defiance in them replaced by dawning realization. What have you done?" he choked, his voice trembling. Fury flickered weakly before giving way to pure panic. He raised his clawed hands, trying desperately to summon destructive energy, to twist reality itself in his favor. But the domain crushed every effort before it could manifest, snuffing out his power like a candle in a storm. Champa advanced, each step a Herculean effort. His skeletal frame trembled under the strain, and his breathing grew more ragged. He could feel his heart slowing, his body breaking down with each second. 4 minutes left, maybe less. He couldn't waste a moment. "I was afraid to use this power," he said softly, his voice carrying across the oppressive silence of the void. "Afraid to meet my own end." His glowing white eyes flickered faintly as he drew closer to his enemy. "But I am a god of destruction. My life was never truly my own. It belongs to the duty I bear, the universe I swore to protect. Behind him, Kale clung tightly to Caulifla's arm, tears streaming down her face. Her lips quivered as she whispered, He's giving everything he has. He's really going to die, isn't he? Caulifla's jaw clenched, and she fought to hold back her own tears. Her fists trembled, the frustration of their helplessness boiling inside her. We can't do anything, she admitted bitterly, her voice thick with anger and sorrow. They had fought with everything they had, fused into Kefla, and pushed themselves to the brink, yet none of it had been enough. In the end, only Champa could stand against Mephistopheles, and the price was beyond comprehension. Mephistopheles' form flickered, his massive frame writhing as chunks of his body dissolved into nothingness. A snarl escaped his lips, desperate and hollow. If I perish here, he spat, his voice filled with venom and despair, then I will make sure you suffer first. With one final surge of his dwindling energy, the demon god hurled himself forward, his hands glowing with a sickly green light. The attack expanded outward in a chaotic burst, threatening to rip through the domain itself. But the void of eternal obliteration would not be so easily undone. Champa's movements became impossibly fluid, as though the domain itself guided him. He ducked low, his skeletal frame weaving beneath the attack with eerie precision. The unstable energy rippled past him, dissipating harmlessly into the endless void. In the same instant, Champa surged upward, his hand piercing through the demon's attack as if it were mere fog. Mephistopheles froze, his glowing hands trembling as they failed to reform. His crimson eyes darted wildly in panic. Champa wasted no time. With his remaining strength, he delivered a devastating strike, a blow not just of physical force, but of pure destruction itself. It was the embodiment of his divine power, a force that reduced all things to nothingness. The impact was silent, but its effect was absolute. Mephistopheles didn't explode, nor did he scream. His form simply unraveled, as if his very existence had been undone. Shreds of his essence were torn apart, disintegrating into non-existence, as though he had never been. Yet, in those fleeting final moments, Mephistopheles reached out with his mind to his fellow demon god. A last, desperate connection. He tried to summon their aid, his thoughts racing toward them. But then he felt it, a severed link. One of the connections failed to open. To a being like Mephistopheles, the meaning was clear. His fellow demon god, Abaddon, was dead. The connection with Azazel succeeded. The voice of his kin, cold and sharp, echoed in his mind. It took you long enough, Azazel said, irritation evident. Report, have you captured the false demon yet? But Mephistopheles did not answer the question. Instead, his voice, weak and fading, carried only two words. Avenge me. What are you saying? Azazel snapped, his tone shifting to confusion and alarm. Mephistopheles! Mephistopheles, respond! But the connection was already severed. Mephistopheles was gone, his essence erased entirely. Caulifla and Kale stared wide-eyed at the space where the demon god had stood. There was nothing left, not even a trace of his energy. The terrifying, seemingly unstoppable nightmare had ended in an instant, as though it had never been real at all. And then their gaze turned to Champa. The god of destruction stood amidst the fading flames of his oblivion mode, his skeletal form swaying unsteadily. The black and violet energy that had surrounded him began to flicker and dim, signaling the toll this technique had taken. His eyes, once blazing with destructive power, now struggled to stay open. He was running out of time. 3 minutes, perhaps less. He could feel his essence draining faster than before, his life slipping through his fingers like sand. The void of eternal obliteration still surrounded them, sealing them off from the universe beyond. The demon was gone, and Universe 6 was safe for now. But Champa knew the greatest threat left was his own impending death. Caulifla staggered forward, her body trembling with exhaustion and emotion. Lord Champa, she shouted, her voice breaking as it echoed strangely within the domain. She wanted to run to him, to help him, to save him, but the unstable energy radiating from his body made her skin burn and tingle, forcing her to stop in her tracks. Kale's eyes glistened with tears that refused to stop. She stepped forward cautiously, her hands trembling as she reached out toward Champa, her voice breaking. Don't leave, she pleaded, her words barely more than a whisper. Please, there has to be a way to save you. There has to be something. Champa turned his gaze to the young Saiyan warriors. His once proud, vibrant eyes were now hollow and dim, like the last flickers of a fading flame. His body had become almost transparent, fragile cracks of light running through him, as if he were made of brittle glass. He tried to speak, but his first attempt was met with nothing but a ragged breath. Finally, after a painful moment, he found his voice. "It's done," he said softly, his tone heavy with finality. "The demon is no more." He paused, his knees buckling slightly as he fought to remain upright. His hand, trembling and barely solid, looked alien even to him. The outline of his fingers flickered faintly, and he stared at them with a bittersweet expression. "I knew from the moment I created this domain that I would die here. That was the price I was willing to pay." Caulifla's fists clenched tightly, her knuckles white as her frustration and sorrow built to a boiling point. "No, there has to be something, anything," she shouted, her voice shaking with desperation. "We can't just let this happen." But Champa shook his head slowly, the motion calm but unyielding, halting her protest. His voice softened, growing weaker with every word. "Listen to me," he said, his tone almost fatherly, a rarity for the once boastful god. "You must remember what happened here. When this domain collapses, you will be free. Universe 6 still needs protectors, and it seems the two of you have a spark." His lips curved into the faintest smile. "Do not let it go to waste." Kale choked back a sob as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. The weight of his sacrifice pressed on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her legs trembled as she took another hesitant step closer, her hand outstretched toward Champa's fading form. "Please," she whispered, her voice quivering with heartbreak. "Don't go." Champa's breathing grew more labored, each inhale shallow and strained. The darkness around them flickered erratically as the domain began to weaken. Tiny fissures of dim light appeared in the void, spreading like cracks in a breaking mirror. His grip on the technique was slipping. Caulifla's sharp eyes darted around as she noticed the cracks. Panic flooded her voice. "The domain! It's breaking!" she exclaimed, her tone frantic. Her gaze shot back to Champa. "If it collapses too soon, what happens to us?" Champa managed a ghost of a smile, the weary curve of his lips more reassuring than it should have been. "You will live," he promised, his voice gentle but resolute. "That much I can do for you." The two sane girls could only hover helplessly, watching as the god of destruction, their god, slowly faded away. Each second felt like an eternity, a knife twisting deeper into their heart. They wanted to scream, to demand the universe itself to intervene, to spare him, yet they could do nothing. Champa's body began to fragment, pieces of his form breaking apart into shimmering motes of light that floated into the thinning darkness. The black flames surrounding him sputtered and dimmed as the void of eternal obliteration neared its end. The demon was gone. The battle was over. But the cost was too high. As the domain trembled and crumbled like fragile parchment, Caulifla stumbled forward, her legs barely able to carry her. Her voice cracked as she called out, "Lord Champa!" The unstable energy still radiating from him made her skin tingle and burn, forcing her to stop just short of touching him. Champa's flickering eyes turned toward her one last time. His focus was slipping, his essence unraveling with each passing moment, yet he forced himself to answer. "Because," he began, his voice faint and strained, as if carried on a dying wind. He paused, his gaze distant, but his final words were steady, resolute. "Because I'm a changed man." And with that, the entire domain shuddered violently. The swirling darkness around them collapsed inward, and the last remnants of Champa disintegrated into light, leaving only silence behind. The scene shifted abruptly to the Nil realm, a bleak and desolate dimension untouched by the passage of time. It was a place of ancient power, where even gods and mortals feared to tread. Once a forgotten plane, it now served as the stronghold of Zarama, the first mortal, and Azazel, the last of the primordial demon god. Azazel stood in the vast, hollow expanse of his base, his expression a mask of cold disbelief. He had felt it. Another link severed, another comrade fallen. For the first time in eons, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his features. "Mephistopheles," Azazel muttered, his voice low and sharp. His hands tightened into fists as he processed the loss. Two primordial demon gods had fallen in less than a month. For beings that once stood as the pinnacle of power in the multiverse, such losses were unimaginable. A few millennia ago, the primordial demons had been second only to the angelic race in strength and influence, titans who dictated the balance of existence itself. Now, they were dwindling, their numbers falling like brittle dominoes. Azazel's eyes narrowed as his mind raced. His plan to revive the demon race, already delicate, was now teetering on the edge of collapse. Mephistopheles had been a key part of his schemes, and now— "This is unacceptable," Azazel growled, his voice laced with cold fury. He straightened, his towering form emanating an aura of malevolence that seemed to stretch across the realm itself. Yet in the depths of his mind, even Azazel could not deny the truth. His once invincible race, the primordial demons, was fading. For the first time in countless eons, Azazel felt the sting of desperation. "How can this be?" Azazel roared, slamming his fist into the cold, unyielding floor of the Nil realm. The force of his blow sent deep cracks spiderwebbing through the dark surface. His crimson aura flared briefly, a reflection of his boiling frustration and disbelief. The outburst caught Zarama's attention. The ancient mortal, seated in quiet contemplation just moments before, turned his piercing gaze toward the last primordial demon god. "What's the matter, Azazel?" Zarama asked calmly, his tone carrying an air of detached curiosity. "Have they captured the false demon yet? They've been gone for quite some time." Azazel straightened, his eyes narrowing as he addressed Zarama. His voice was sharp, tinged with barely contained rage. "It turns out Mephistopheles is dead." The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap, and even Zarama, stoic and calculating, paused in visible surprise. His expression flickered with a rare trace of unease before settling back into his usual calm demeanor. "Dead?" Zarama repeated, his voice carrying a note of skepticism. "Mephistopheles may have been the weakest of us, but he was still a primordial. The thought of two primordial beings being killed in such quick succession, it's troubling." He tapped his finger against Belmont's unconscious form, his expression darkening. The body of the former universe, 11 god of destruction, lay limp at Zarama's feet, his chest barely rising with shallow breath. Belmont had been subdued and dragged to the Nil realm for one purpose: to have his divinity absorbed by Zarama. Zarama's voice took on a thoughtful tone. "This changes things. If beings exist who can slay primordial demon gods, then they are a threat to more than just the demon race. It would seem our enemies are far stronger than we anticipated." Azazel's claws flexed involuntarily, his frustration mounting. "This plan of mine, this perfect plan to revive the demon race and claim dominion, has cost us too much already." He gestured toward the void beyond the chamber, his anger palpable. Now, with Mephistopheles gone, everything is falling apart. Zarama remained silent for a moment, his calculating mind piecing together the fragments of their predicament. His gaze lingered on Belmod as he spoke. "You're right about one thing. The plan has failed. The demons are no longer as interested in our original deal. They've become distracted by the gods of destruction, sensing their power as a greater prize." Azazel snarled, baring his teeth. "I warned them not to deviate from the plan. If they had simply followed through, they would still have died." Zarama interrupted smoothly, his tone cold and final. He traced a finger along Belmod's forehead, sparks of crimson light flickering where his touch met the god's skin. "No matter. Their distractions have only accelerated my true goal." Azazel's gaze sharpened. "What are you saying?" Zarama smirked faintly, his finger stopping over Belmod's chest. "I allowed the demons to pursue the gods of destruction because I needed them to gather as many as possible in one place. Once the time was right, I intended to absorb them all, primordial demon gods included. With their power, I would ascend to my final form." Azazel's crimson eyes widened, stunned by the audacity of Zarama's admission. "But now," Zarama continued, his voice growing darker, "circumstances have forced me to act sooner than planned. Belmod will be the first." Before Azazel could react, Zarama's hand flared with a crimson glow. Tendrils of energy erupted from his palm, wrapping around Belmod's unconscious body like serpents. The god's life essence, a mixture of divinity and mortal strength, began to pour into Zarama, the air humming with power as the room itself seemed to tremble. "What are you doing?" Azazel shouted, stepping forward, his claws outstretched. "Stop this! You can't!" Zarama didn't even glance in Azazel's direction. "It's such a shame it had to come to this," he said, his voice devoid of remorse. "But Belmod's essence is mine now." Azazel's frustration boiled over, his aura flaring violently. "Stop! You don't understand. If you absorb him, then there is no way for me to revive my race." Zarama's lips curled into a mocking smile as he glanced at the demon god. "Your race? Your precious demon race? You mean nothing without me. If you want to save them, Azazel, then fulfill your promise. Bring me the power I desire. Find the strongest beings across the multiverse. Pull them from dimensions if you must, and feed them to me." Azazel's hands trembled with restrained fury. He wanted to lash out, to rip Zarama apart for for jeopardizing the last hope of the demon. But Zarama's cold, calculating eyes pinned him in place, radiating a dominance that even the primordial demon god could not ignore. Azazel let out a low growl before bowing his head slightly, his voice filled with reluctant submission. As you wish. Closing his eyes, Azazel extended his senses, his consciousness stretching across the vast expanse of the multiverse. He began searching, seeking out the strongest warriors, gods, or entities whose power could satiate Zarama's insatiable hunger. Zarama smirked, his hand continuing to drain Belmont's life essence. Good, he murmured, his voice dripping with satisfaction. Soon, everything will be as it should. Azazel's crimson eyes glinted as his key senses extended across the vast multiverse, seeking out a viable target. A flicker of recognition passed through his mind when he located Frieza, but the tyrant wasn't alone. Frieza was traveling alongside none other than Beerus, the same false demon that Abaddon had foolishly pursued and lost his life trying to capture. Azazel's lips curled into a sneer. The two were quite far away, outside the scope of his instant travel. Azazel's ability to teleport allowed him to traverse the multiverse instantly, but only to places he had visited before. While he had been to the universe where Beerus and Frieza were headed, their exact location was unfamiliar to him. Both of them were currently en route to Zuno, the omniscient being who knew everything. To reach them without instant travel would take days, time he simply didn't have. The longer Azazel failed to bring Zarama the power he craved, the more the first mortal would drain Belmont's life essence. Azazel clenched his fists, weighing his options. As he deliberated, his heightened senses caught something else, a presence in Universe 7. His attention sharpened immediately. This new presence, though not godly, radiated considerable power. Azazel smirked faintly, a predatory gleam in his eyes. If this being's energy was sufficient, perhaps it could sate Zarama's hunger temporarily. Interesting, Azazel murmured to himself. Turning back to Zarama, he inclined his head respectfully. My lord, he said, his deep voice steady despite the tension in the air. I've located a being of considerable strength. I will retrieve their power for you. I'll return in a few hours. Zarama looked up from Belmont's limp form, his expression cold and calculating. Oh, he said, his voice as calm as the stillness before a storm. Then take this. With a flick of his wrist, Zarama produced a small ornate flask. Its surface shimmered with an eerie silver glow, etched with symbols in a language older than time itself. This is a divine relic, Zarama explained, handing it to Azazel. Once your target is on the verge of death, you must recite the language written on the bottom of the flask. It will siphon and store their life essence, their power, within. Zarama's voice dropped into a dangerous tone, his eyes narrowing. And Azazel, he continued, don't come back with less than the energy of 5 beings. Each one must be as strong as this Belmod, or stronger. Azazel accepted the relic, gripping it tightly as his sharp gaze met Zarama. As you command, my lord, he said. His tone was respectful, but beneath the surface, a flicker of annoyance stirred. He loathed being reduced to an errand boy, but Zarama's overwhelming dominance left him little choice. Azazel's eyes glowed faintly as he focused his senses on the being he had identified in Universe 7. The one I'm targeting, he began, is of the Namekian race, Piccolo. He wields significant power, though I cannot yet determine if he rivals the false demon. I'll have to find out for myself. Zarama leaned back, his smirk returning. For your sake, and his, he said, his voice a chilling mix of amusement and threat. You had better hope he does. Otherwise, Azazel, his eyes burned with malice, the next being I absorb will be you. The words lingered in the air like an executioner's blade poised to strike. Azazel bowed slightly, concealing his rising frustration. Understood, he said curtly. Without another word, he vanished into a swirling black portal, his crimson aura trailing behind him like smoke. Azazel emerged in Universe 7, the stars around him shining dimly against the vast expanse of space. His senses zeroed in on Piccolo's location with precision, the Namekian's energy signature standing out like a beacon amidst the other faint presences of the planet. Let's see if you're as strong as you appear, Azazel muttered, a predatory smirk tugging at his lips. His crimson eyes gleamed with anticipation as he shot toward Earth, the faint glow of Piccolo's energy drawing him closer with each passing moment. The scene shifted to the first dimension, where Gohan made his entrance into the multiverse. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the entire multiverse shuddered violently, as though barely able to hold itself together under the weight of his power. This wasn't just energy, it was something deeper, more profound, a force so vast that it rippled through existence itself. Gohan didn't hold back. He unleashed the full extent of his presence, as if to announce to all creation that he had arrived. On planets across countless dimensions, living beings, whether advanced civilizations or primitive tribes, felt the tremor of his ki. They couldn't comprehend what this overwhelming energy was or where it came from, but it was undeniable. A bone-deep chill spread through them, an instinctive reaction to something beyond their understanding. Even the planets themselves seemed to recoil. Earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, and violent storms erupted simultaneously across the multiverse, as though nature itself struggled to endure his arrival. In the divine realms, the Kai sprang to their feet, their serene composure shattered. Each one exchanged alarmed glances as they felt the shockwaves of a being whose power eclipsed anything they had ever known. Mortal or deity, it made no difference. This energy was immeasurable. On planet Namek, Azazel froze mid-step. His usually calm demeanor gave way to visible alarm. His brow furrowed, and his eyes widened in disbelief. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling as he struggled to process the magnitude of the power he was sensing. His hands clenched into fists as the energy continued to surge. "No, it can't be." He trailed off, unable to finish his thoughts, his entire being consumed by the impossibility of it all. Far away in the null realm, the first mortal, Zarama, slowly rose from his obsidian throne. His crimson eyes glimmered with curiosity as he too felt the arrival of this new force. "What's this?" he muttered, the corner of his mouth curling into an intrigued smile. So much power, and not just power, something different. He leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. Fascinating. So much raw energy, just waiting for someone to claim it. He chuckled to himself, but then paused, as if reconsidering his next move. "Not yet," Zarama finally said, his grin widening as he reclined back into his throne. "It's not time to act, but soon, oh, so very soon, all the power in the multiverse will be mine." Meanwhile, in the heart of the first dimension, Gohan stood tall, his gaze sharp and unwavering. For the first time since his resurrection, he spoke, his voice calm, yet carrying a weight that seemed to resonate through the fabric of reality. "Finally, I'm here." A moment later, his eyes glowed with a fiery intensity as his energy surged outward once more. The burst of ki was so immense that it formed visible shockwaves, radiating out like a supernova. Entire galaxies quaked under the pressure as Gohan focused, honing in on the unique signatures of those he sought. His mastery over ki was unparalleled. He had transcended mortal limits, unlocking a deep understanding of the essence of life itself. To Gohan, ki was not just energy, it was life, a signature as unique as a fingerprint. He extended his senses further, pushing his ki into the multiverse to locate his friends. Slowly but surely, he began to pick up familiar traces, faint but distinct. "Mom? Piccolo," he muttered, relief flickering across his face. He zeroed in on their ki, finding them on planet Namek. The faint familiarity brought a momentary sense of comfort, but it was fleeting. His expression darkened as he expanded his search, probing deeper, stretching his awareness to its limits. He couldn't sense Earth. The realization hit him like a blow. The Earth itself, a living planet with its own ki, was gone. His jaw tightened as he stood there, silent but seething with unspoken emotions. But what troubled him even more was the absence of two key energies. No matter how far or how hard he searched, there was nothing. No trace of Broly, no sign of Vegeta. "Where are they?" he murmured, his voice low but laced with urgency. He clenched his fists, frustration boiling under the surface. Gohan knew their ki was unique, impossible to mistake for anyone else's, and yet it was as though they had vanished entirely. For the first time since his return, doubt crept into his mind. His immense power could find anything in the multiverse, anything alive. So why couldn't he find them? Gohan's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. What's happened? Where could they be? He murmured, his voice a low growl of frustration. Then, a chilling thought struck him, one he didn't want to consider. Could they be dead? His chest tightened, but he quickly dismissed the idea. No, I would have seen them in other world. Maybe they weren't allowed to keep their bodies like I was. That explanation didn't sit right with him either. His fists clenched as he forced himself to think logically. King Ki would have informed me, he reasoned. If they were dead, he would have said something, but he didn't. His eyes narrowed, glowing faintly as his frustration boiled over. Which means they aren't dead. Then where in the hell are they? The tension around him was so thick, it felt like it could be cut with a blade. His every thought swirled like a storm, threatening to overwhelm him. But then he felt it, a familiar spark of energy that was unmistakably his father's ki. "Dad!" Gohan exclaimed, his voice filled with urgency. Relief was fleeting, however, as he focused on Goku's energy. It was plummeting, dropping rapidly like a stone in water. His breath caught in his throat as he realized what this meant. Goku was hurt, badly. If his ki hit 0, Gohan knew what would happen. His father would die. Why is his energy falling so fast? Gohan's mind raced, his focus sharpened, his senses probing further, searching for an answer. His brows furrowed as frustration began to creep back. "He's in a fight. That much is clear," Gohan muttered. "But with who? Why can't I sense their energy?" The absence of any other ki nearby puzzled and infuriated him. It was as if Goku were fighting a ghost. Or wait, Gohan froze as a realization dawned. Whoever it is doesn't have ki. The implications hit him like a thunderbolt. His knowledge of combat and the elements of the world were vast, but this was unlike anything he'd encountered. "No ki," he whispered. Then his mind flashed to one possibility. The Grand Priest. The name lingered on his tongue, heavy with meaning. It made sense. The Grand Priest, unlike mortals or deities, didn't possess traditional ki. His energy operated on a plane so advanced it was beyond Gohan's ability to detect. That realization only deepened the mystery surrounding Vegeta and Broly. If the Grand Priest was involved, then what about the others? And what was Vegeta's connection to the other fundamental elements of the world? The questions burned in Gohan's mind, but there was no time to dwell. Goku's life hung in the balance. With a determined expression, Gohan did something that defied the limits of reality itself. He began to draw in ki, not just from nearby sources, but from across the entire multiverse. The act resembled the way a Quincy from Bleach would absorb reishi from the Soul Society, but on an even grander scale. Energy from stars, planets, and living beings flowed into him, the sheer magnitude of it illuminating his body with a radiant glow. When the process was complete, Gohan extended his hand to the sky, his fingers curling as if gripping an invisible force. His eyes burned with determination as he pulled back, and the air around him shattered like fragile glass. A deafening crack echoed through the void, and the fabric of reality itself splintered. A rift opened before him, and Gohan stepped through without hesitation. On the other side was the Palace of the Omni King, an awe-inspiring structure that floated in the center of the multiverse, a place where time and space converged. The crack in the sky began to seal itself, slowly returning the multiverse to balance as the ki Gohan had borrowed dispersed back to its sources. Inside the palace, the Grand Priest, the Daishinkan, sensed the disturbance immediately. His head tilted upward as he felt the ripple in the air, his senses keenly aware of the approaching force. The rift opened, and a figure stepped through, calm yet radiating unimaginable power. As Gohan emerged, his expression was steady, almost serene, but the raw energy emanating from him told a different story. The Grand Priest's gaze fixed on him, his expression unreadable. But then, a faint smile tugged at his lips. "Ah, it's you," the Daishinkan said, his voice smooth and unhurried. "The son of Goku." He folded his hands behind his back, his posture relaxed, but his tone laced with intrigue. "Aren't you supposed to be dead? The last time I saw you, you were sprawled out on the ground like a lifeless corpse." The Grand Priest's eyes narrowed, his words deliberate and pointed. "Of course, someone intervened, didn't they? Pulled your lifeless body, and that of the other Saiyan, Broly, out of a time portal." The Grand Priest, standing with his usual air of calm authority, spoke in a tone laced with curiosity and calculation. He was probing, trying to unearth information that had eluded him. The being who had managed to nullify one of his most potent abilities was a dangerous anomaly, and it needed to be dealt with swiftly. To protect his plans and ensure the integrity of the Omni King's trial, he had concealed this incident entirely, even lying to the Omni King himself. Now, he was determined to uncover the truth. "Who saved you?" the Grand Priest finally asked, his earlier subtlety discarded. His sharp gaze bore into Gohan as he awaited an answer. Gohan's expression didn't change. His body exuded an aura of overwhelming power, but his face remained unreadable. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied, his voice cold and resolute. "Nor do I care." He took a deliberate step forward, the weight of his energy pressing against the space around them. "All I came here for is to save my father, and if killing you happens to be a bonus, well, that's just fine with me." The Grand Priest's lips twitched into a faint smile, but he said nothing. He knew Gohan was speaking the truth, at least the truth as far as Gohan knew it. What the young Saiyan didn't realize was that he'd been saved by forces beyond his understanding, events set into motion while he had been dead. Gohan's sole awareness of his return to life stemmed from Broly's use of the Dragon Balls, and nothing more. Below them, sprawled across the ground, lay Goku. His body trembled as he struggled to even lift his head. His stamina was completely depleted, and his energy was dangerously low, forcing him out of his form and leaving him utterly vulnerable. As he blinked through the haze clouding his vision, he saw the figure above him, the one exuding such extraordinary power. The silhouette was familiar, yet something about it felt different. "Who?" Goku rasped, his voice weak. The figure's energy reminded him of Gohan, yet it wasn't exactly the same. He squinted harder, his fading strength making it difficult to focus. The moment of clarity came not from recognition, but from the Grand Priest's own words, "the son of Goku." Hearing that, Goku's eyes widened. His mind raced, struggling to process what he was seeing. His heart surged with hope as he realized the impossible had happened. "Gohan," he murmured. His voice, though faint, carried an unmistakable mix of disbelief and joy. "Is that truly you, my boy?" With the last ounce of his energy, Goku shouted, "My son, Gohan, you're alive." Gohan's sharp hearing caught his father's cry. He didn't respond. At least, not with words. His body tensed, and in an instant, he vanished. His speed was incomprehensible, faster than anything Goku or even many gods had ever witnessed. The air itself seemed to collapse in his absence, and before anyone could react, Gohan reappeared directly behind the Grand Priest. The motion was seamless, fluid, and terrifying. His fist was already cocked back, charged with energy and force that could shatter entire dimensions. He launched the punch at a speed that defied comprehension, his intent crystal clear. He wasn't here to talk. The Grand Priest, however, was no ordinary opponent. Despite Gohan's blistering speed, the deity reacted with unnerving precision. Without even turning around, he summoned a barrier of shimmering energy, a circle of infinity that encased his entire body. Though weaker than Zeno's omnipotent infinity barrier, it was still a formidable defense. As Gohan's fist closed in, the energy slowed his momentum dramatically, as though he were trying to punch through a wall of molasses. "What the?" Gohan exclaimed, his eyes narrowing in surprise. The resistance was unexpected, and for a fleeting moment it startled him. This was unlike any technique he had encountered before, but Gohan's shock quickly gave way to analysis. The infinity barrier was powerful, yes, but Gohan's beast, 101 form, wasn't simply about brute force. It was about the mastery of ki on an unparalleled level. This form itself siphoned energy from the world around it, and in this dimension, everything contained the ki. Even the fabric of space, tied to the infinity the Grand Priest wielded, was composed of matter that emanated traces of energy. And if it had ki, then Gohan could manipulate it. Gohan's lips curled into a fierce smirk. "Nice trick," he muttered, but not good enough. As his fist inched closer, the barrier seemed to slow it to a crawl, giving the Grand Priest a moment to smirk, believing his defense had succeeded. But then, to his surprise, the barrier began to unravel. It was subtle at first, strands of the infinity's energy peeling away like frayed threads. Within a heartbeat, the barrier collapsed entirely, as though it had been stripped away by an invisible force. "What?" the Grand Priest shouted, genuine surprise flickering across his usually stoic face. That moment of distraction cost him dearly. Gohan's fist connected squarely with the deity's chest, the impact detonating with a resounding boom. The shockwave of the punch reverberated through the Omni King's palace, shaking its very foundation. The force sent the Grand Priest hurtling backward like a meteor. His body smashed into the rocky structure upon which Zeno's palace was perched, creating a massive crater that marred the pristine surface. The Grand Priest's form lay within the rubble, motionless for a moment as dust and debris swirled in the air. Gohan remained standing where he had delivered the punch, his eyes locked on the impact site, his body radiating the quiet yet unstoppable intensity of a storm held at bay. To everyone's astonishment, the Grand Priest was not injured, not physically at least. As the dust and debris settled around him, he rose slowly from the crater, brushing off his pristine robes. His expression wasn't one of anger, but of curiosity. The smirk on his lips, while slight, radiated danger. He was puzzled, genuinely intrigued by what had just occurred. His infinity breached, the Grand Priest muttered to himself, his hand hovering over where Gohan's punch had landed. The sensation lingered faintly, like a phantom sting. "No, it's not possible," he mused, eyes narrowing. "Infinity isn't something that can be broken. It's boundless, immutable." He paused, then glanced back at Gohan, who stood in the distance with unyielding confidence. And yet, it was stripped apart, reduced to matter. How? He straightened his posture and allowed himself a chuckle. "That boy," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of fascination and menace. "He truly is extraordinary." These sayings, the smirk deepened, his gaze sharpening with both respect and calculation. "They continue to surprise me, time and time again." His thoughts turned briefly to Goku, who had struggled to even graze him moments ago. "A while ago, his father couldn't even lay a finger on me," the Grand Priest murmured. "And yet, here stands the sun, a Saiyan whose power shatters expectations. Why is that?" Meanwhile, on the battlefield below, Goku looked up at his son through bleary, exhausted eyes. His body was trembling, barely able to support itself, but his voice carried all the emotion of a father who had just witnessed a miracle. "Gohan?" he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is that really you? You're alive, son?" "Yes, Dad, it's me," Gohan replied, turning his gaze toward his father. His lips curled into a small grin, though his tone carried a hint of lighthearted sarcasm. "Never thought I'd see you looking this bad, though." He shook his head slightly and chuckled. "You got your ass kicked." Goku let out a weak laugh, wincing from the effort. "Yeah, he's strong, really strong," he admitted, his voice a mix of admiration and exhaustion. But then, his eyes lit up as he looked at his son more closely. "But look at you! Is this a new transformation? I can tell it's something incredible. Gohan, you're more powerful than me now." Gohan's smirk widened, and his tone shifted to one of quiet pride. "Can't you tell, Dad? This isn't just any form. It's the result of mastering the Kaioken technique, all 101 levels of it." "Kaioken?" Goku's brows furrowed in confusion and astonishment. "Wait, you're telling me there's a level beyond 100? And this?" He gestured to the powerful aura radiating off Gohan, shimmering like a flame with a vibrant mix of colors. "This doesn't look or feel anything like the Kaioken I know. Mine multiplied my strength and speed, but it wasn't a form like this. What is this, Gohan?" "It's complicated," Gohan admitted, his expression briefly serious before softening again. "But the gist of it, to reach this ultimate state, I had to sacrifice all my previous transformations. Well, not exactly sacrifice, merge them." He held out his hand, his aura flaring briefly as he spoke. "Every form I've ever had, Super Saiyan, Ultimate, everything, has been combined into this one form. It's the culmination of mastering Ki and all 101 levels of Kaioken. And now," he clenched his fist, "this is all I need." Goku's eyes widened further, his mind racing to process what his son was saying. "Merge transformations," he repeated in awe. "Gohan, we don't have time for a history lesson, Dad," Gohan interrupted, turning his attention back to the Grand Priest. "We've got a deity to kill." His voice was sharp, determined. Before Goku could respond, Gohan stepped forward, placing a hand gently on his father's chest. Goku blinked in surprise, but said nothing, as a warm, vibrant energy began to flow into him. It wasn't like the healing effects of a Senzu bean. This was something entirely different. Gohan was channeling his ki into his father's body, guiding it with precision. The sensation was incredible. Goku felt the energy surge to places within him that had been drained or restricted. His heart, his lung, even his brain, his blood, both red and white cells, were supercharged, healing damage at a cellular level. It wasn't just healing, it was like regeneration, as though his body were being rebuilt from within. "Gohan, what is this?" Goku asked, his voice full of amazement as he felt strength returning to his limbs. "Just one of the perks of mastering Ki," Gohan replied simply, stepping back as the process completed. "You're good to go now." Goku flexed his hands, astonished. He felt completely replenished, better than he had in years. "This is incredible," he said, testing his strength with a few quick movements. "It's like I just ate a senzu." "No, it's even better." In an instant, Goku leapt back to his feet, landing lightly beside his son. His aura flared briefly as he grinned. "All right, Gohan," he said, his voice filled with renewed determination. "Let's do this." "Oh," the Grand Priest murmured, his sharp eyes narrowing as the pieces finally clicked into place. He watched intently as Gohan stood alongside Goku, exuding an aura of mastery and control. The sight stirred something within him, something akin to both fascination and unease. "That body," he muttered. "It wields one of the 5 fundamental elements of the universe." His voice lowered as his thoughts raced. But how? Where could he have learned such a thing? He gripped his staff tightly, his expression hardening. "I specifically ordered every record of that knowledge destroyed after Zeno mastered all 5 elements. So where did he gain access to it? His gaze locked on Gohan, burning with determination. I must get to the bottom of this. The realization explained much. The Grand Priest now understood how Gohan had breached his infinity barrier. It wasn't brute force alone. It was a deeper manipulation of ki, something so rare and refined that even the gods themselves had forgotten it. That alone made Gohan a dangerous opponent. Without hesitation, the Grand Priest tapped his staff on the ground. A sharp, resonant sound echoed through the air, and almost immediately, the ground began to fracture. Cracks spread outward like a spiderweb at blinding speed, reaching toward the Saiyans before erupting into a massive explosion. The force was cataclysmic, obliterating everything in its path. But when the smoke cleared, Gohan and Goku had vanished, their speed far exceeding the explosion's reach. As the two reappeared, Goku wasted no time. His body flared with energy as he powered up into his most advanced form yet. Ultra Instinct 3, Kaioken, multiplied by 100. His aura burned like a silvery inferno tinged with fiery red streaks, a breathtaking combination of precision and raw power. The transformation strained his stamina, but it made up for the toll with unparalleled speed and strength. I'm not holding back this time, Goku said firmly, his voice carrying the calm focus of someone who had mastered his limits. But before Goku could make his move, something caught his eye, something that left him stunned. Gohan had already closed the distance to the Grand Priest. What? Goku gasped, struggling to keep up with the blistering pace of the fight unfolding before him. The sheer speed of Gohan's movements was beyond even his heightened perception. It wasn't just the speed that left Goku in awe. It was the power behind each of Gohan's strikes. The Grand Priest wasn't evading Gohan as he had with Goku earlier. No, he couldn't evade. Every attempt to dodge was met with Gohan's relentless fist, forcing the deity to block, barely. The force of each blow was staggering. Every punch Gohan landed shook the very fabric of the dimension, and every strike seemed to have an edge to it. Gohan had coated his fists with a layer of refined ki, a deadly enhancement that allowed him to bypass the Grand Priest's defenses. Each direct hit chipped away at the deity's life force, draining it incrementally. The battle raged on, their clash reverberating across the universe. Their movements were so fast, they seemed to glitch in and out of existence, appearing and disappearing in flashes of light. When their fists collided, shockwaves erupted, rippling through the cosmos. The difference, however, was clear. Gohan was doing far more damage. His attacks were precise and devastating, each one carrying the weight of his training, his mastery, and his sheer will. From the sidelines, Goku watched in awe. "Incredible," he whispered, a mix of pride and disbelief swelling in his chest. He's actually pushing the Grand Priest back. The Grand Priest, however, had seen enough. "Enough!" he bellowed, his voice ringing like a hammer against steel. In a swift motion, he caught Gohan mid-punch, gripping his arm with unrelenting strength. With a burst of energy, he tossed Gohan into the air like a comet, sending him hurtling toward the planet's surface below. Gohan twisted in midair, landing gracefully on his feet. He immediately looked up, his fiery gaze locking onto the deity hovering above. The Grand Priest's expression was cold, but there was a hint of respect in his eyes, a grudging acknowledgement of the Saiyan's strength. "I had initially thought that 10% of my power would be enough to deal with you," the Grand Priest said, his voice calm yet carrying a dangerous edge. "But it seems I was naive." The deity raised his staff, his aura beginning to swell. The energy around him grew denser, darker, and more terrifying with each passing second. The very dimension they stood in began to quake violently under the weight of his power. "It's time I show you what real power looks like," the Grand Priest declared. His energy surged, rising higher and higher, the intensity of it shaking the multiverse itself. The air grew thick, the sky fractured with arcs of lightning, and the ground split apart. Gohan stood his ground, unwavering, as the Grand Priest's energy climbed to new heights. 15%, 25%, the deity muttered as his power continued to rise. At 50%, the multiverse itself seemed to scream in protest, the strain threatening to tear it apart. The Grand Priest stopped there, knowing that any further release would result in complete collapse. "Prepare yourself, Saiyan," the Grand Priest said, his aura blazing like an all-consuming sun. "From here on out, the real fight begins." The rift-torn sky shimmered violently, streaked with unnatural colors, as the Grand Priest hovered effortlessly, exuding an aura that felt like the weight of entire galaxies. His serene expression contrasted with the catastrophic energy waves rippling outward, shaking the very fabric of space-time. Stars in the distance flickered and dimmed, as if bowing to the overwhelming presence dominating the battlefield. He was the number one among the top 5 beings in existence, a fact that now felt like an unassailable truth. Gohan hovered beside his father, his body trembling under the crushing pressure. His beast, 101 aura, blazed brightly, the feral energy crackling like a wild storm. But even its intensity couldn't dispel the suffocating force pressing down on him. Beads of sweat rolled down his face as he steadied his breathing, trying to keep his focus sharp.
"Look at all that power, and he's not even winded," Gohan muttered, his voice barely rising above the oppressive hum of energy. His eyes darted toward the deity, narrowing with determination, even as doubt gnawed at the edges of his resolve. Goku, standing just feet away, looked no better. His silver blue Ultra Instinct aura shimmered faintly, flickering like a dying flame. He was visibly strained, his breath labored, his muscles taut with exertion, and his guy torn in several places. A thin line of blood trickled from a gash above his brow, trailing down his cheek as he kept his unyielding gaze locked on the Grand Priest.
"He's too powerful," Goku admitted, his voice grim. "But we can't let him get the upper hand, not for a second." His aura flared slightly, as though he were trying to will himself into greater strength.
The Grand Priest tilted his head, his eyes sharp and unfeeling as they swept over the 2 Saiyans. He radiated calm authority, but there was a coldness in his tone that sent a shiver through the void. "Your determination is commendable," he said smoothly, his words laced with icy finality. "But this defiance is nothing more than a futile gesture. My power is limitless, even now, as I humor you. A portion of my energy is maintaining the balance of the universe, something those useless gods of destruction could no longer manage after their unfortunate demise." He raised a hand, his fingers moving with an elegant flick that seemed almost dismissive. Instantly, massive translucent orbs of energy materialized around him, shimmering with an eerie, liquid-like glow. They pulsed ominously, each one radiating a suffocating pressure that made the space around them ripple like disturbed water. What are those?" Gohan gasped, his voice cracking as the oppressive energy pressed against his chest like a vice.
The Grand Priest's expression remained impassive. "Fragments of collapsing dimensions," he replied, as though describing something mundane. His voice remained steady, even conversational, which only made the gravity of his words more chilling. "Let us see if your mortal resolve can withstand the weight of annihilation." With a casual gesture, the orbs shot forward, streaking through the void at blinding speeds. The space around them warped violently, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Gohan reacted immediately, his instincts honed by years of battle. His aura surged as he thrust his hands forward, weaving an intricate web of ki into a glowing barrier that spread out like a shimmering dome, shielding both himself and his father. The first orb collided with the barrier, unleashing an explosion that ripped through space itself. The shockwave tore through the battlefield, flattening distant stars and creating swirling black holes in the void. Gohan gritted his teeth, the strain of holding the barrier evident as cracks began to spiderweb across its surface. "I can't hold them all," Gohan shouted, his voice strained as the sheer force of the impact pushed him backward. His arms trembled violently under the pressure, his Kai faltering for a moment before he redoubled his efforts. "Dad, move!" Goku didn't hesitate, his instincts sharper than ever. With a burst of speed, he vanished, reappearing high above the shimmering orbs of dimensional energy, his hands extended, glowing with intense silver blue light, and he unleashed a relentless barrage of energy blasts. Each blast met the incoming projectiles head-on, their collisions igniting a chain reaction of explosions that ripped through the battlefield. The sheer magnitude of the detonations tore the fabric of reality apart, leaving expanding voids in their wake. The chaos didn't slow the Grand Priest. Before Goku could react, the deity was already behind him, moving with terrifying precision. His unreadable expression carried an edge of finality as he raised a glowing hand. "Be gone, you worthless mortal," the Grand Priest said coldly. A devastating pulse of energy erupted from his palm, slamming into Goku's back with an impact that sent shockwaves rippling outward. The force launched Goku downward like a comet, his body engulfed in the Grand Priest's overwhelming ki. As Goku plummeted, he was pulled into the gravity well of a nearby planet, Venus, the hottest in the multiverse. Its toxic atmosphere burned with an intensity fueled by gases from countless universes. When Goku's body collided with the surface, the impact was catastrophic. The planet quaked violently, its molten terrain
shifting as its crust shattered into fragments. Land masses separated and drifted apart, splitting into continents, reminiscent of Earth billions of years ago. "Dad!" Gohan screamed, his voice raw with panic. His aura flared wildly, the crimson energy of his beast 101 form burning brighter than ever. He turned his attention back to the Grand Priest, his expression hardening as his resolve deepened. With a fierce battle cry, Gohan propelled himself forward, his fists blazing with concentrated ki. His strikes were fast and calculated, aimed with deadly precision at the Grand Priest's vital energy points. Gohan's training had taught him that disrupting the flow of ki in a foe's body could temporarily weaken their power. But the Grand Priest wasn't just any foe. He was the pinnacle of cosmic power. The Grand Priest met Gohan's onslaught with ease. His movements were fluid, his hands deflecting every punch and strike as though he were swatting away a child's attacks. Yet for the first time, his expression flickered, showing a faint trace of irritation. "You've learned to manipulate ki in ways that exceed most mortals' understanding," the Grand Priest said, his voice calm but sharp. He swatted away another of Gohan's punches with a sweep of his arm, the motion effortless. "But mastering ki alone will never bring you victory against me." Gohan's fists glowed even brighter, the ki around them pulsating in a strange rhythm, as if resonating with the universe itself. His eyes narrowed, determination burning in their depths. "All I need is one hit," he thought, gritting his teeth. "Just one touch, and I can disrupt the flow of ki in his body." Summoning every ounce of strength he had, Gohan charged in once more. His speed increased exponentially, surpassing the speed of sound, then light, then even tachyon-level movement. To the untrained eye, it was as if Gohan had vanished entirely, his form phasing in and out of existence as he closed the distance between himself and the Grand Priest. But this incredible speed came at a price. To achieve his blinding speed, Gohan relied on the ki coursing through the cosmos, the life energy of the universe itself. As he siphoned this vital force, the cost of his actions rippled across existence. Planets dried up, their lush landscapes crumbling into dust. Others exploded in fiery infernos, snuffing out countless lives in an instant. Every living thing that drew breath, every ecosystem teeming with vitality, was drained as Gohan absorbed their essence to fuel his strength. He was aware of the consequences, painfully so, but he had deemed it a necessary evil. This was not the same Gohan who once hesitated to harm his enemies, who fought with mercy in his heart. The trials of war had hardened him, stripped away his innocence. Sacrifices had to be made, and he refused to let those who had already fallen die in vain. Using his incredible speed, Gohan closed the distance between himself and the Grand Priest in an instant. His strikes came in rapid succession, faster than the eye could track. In the blink of an eye, he had landed 52 precise blows, each one aimed with pinpoint accuracy to block the flow of the Grand Priest's ki. "There," Gohan said, his voice steady despite his labored breathing. His glowing fists lowered as he stood before the deity, his aura flickering ominously. "How does it feel to have your key points sealed? Your great power is locked away for the next hour, more than enough time for us to finish this." But before Gohan could act further, a sudden shift in the cosmos sent a chill through him. His senses, finely tuned to the flow of ki, detected a horrifying reality unfolding. The energy of the multiverse itself was unraveling. He could feel the life force of entire universes being erased, their essence breaking down into raw matter. What's going on?" Gohan shouted, his voice trembling as the weight of the destruction became clear. He dropped to his knees as the energy of Universe 10 faded into nothingness. Moments later, Universe 9 followed, its ki dissipating like a candle blown out by an unfeeling wind. No, Gohan's voice cracked as the implications hit him like a tidal wave. Tears streamed down his face as he thought of everyone: his mother, Videl, Pan, Goten, Piccolo, his friends and family. Everything they had fought to protect was on the brink of annihilation. Mom, Videl, Pan, everyone. Everything is going to be destroyed. The Grand Priest's calm, cold laughter cut through Gohan's anguish like a blade. It started as a chuckle, then grew into an unhinged cackle, echoing through the void with a maddening intensity. His face twisted with pride as he addressed the broken Saiyan. "Yes, it's exactly what you're thinking, Saiyan," the Grand Priest declared, his voice filled with cruel satisfaction. "All of this is your fault. You fools killed the gods of destruction, every last one of them. Tell me, who do you think was keeping the multiverse in balance after your little stunt?" The Grand Priest took a step forward, his aura darkening as his laughter subsided into a sinister grin. "It was me,"
I was the one maintaining equilibrium, the one holding everything together. And now that you've disrupted my ka, I see no reason to keep the balance intact. In fact, why not let it all collapse? Why not start over and create a world far superior to this broken one? No, you wouldn't, Gohan whispered, horror creeping into his voice. Oh, but I would, the Grand Priest sneered. This failed world deserves to be erased. Then, I will craft a new one, a flawless world, free of the mistakes that led to this mess. The Grand Priest's laughter returned, louder and more deranged than before, reverberating through the dying void. Gohan clenched his fists, forced to listen as he felt the life forces of countless beings vanish one by one. Yet, through the overwhelming despair, something caught his attention, a peculiar anomaly in the pattern of destruction. The universes were being destroyed sequentially, beginning with Universe 12 and moving downward. But something strange had occurred. As Gohan scanned the multiverse with his senses, he realized that Universe 7, his home, remained untouched. Universes 12 through 8 had been obliterated, yet the destruction had skipped Universe 7 entirely. Instead, it continued with Universes 6 through 2, and then, finally, to Universe 1. The Grand Priest's smug demeanor evaporated in an instant, replaced by a look of disbelief. His laughter died in his throat as his sharp eyes scanned the remnants of the collapsing multiverse. Universe 7, against all logic, remained untouched. His expression twisted into shock and frustration as he attempted to comprehend the anomaly. But how? He muttered, his voice trembling with disbelief. The confusion on his face deepened as his gaze fell on Goku, lying unconscious on the scorched surface of Venus. The Grand Priest's piercing eyes narrowed, and suddenly, realization flickered across his face, followed by a surge of rage. He recalled the ancient laws governing the cosmos, those immutable rules etched into the very foundation of existence. One in particular stood out, the laws of the Omni, which declared that any being who achieved the status of an Omni had dominion over the universe of their origin, irrespective of their current state. That's not possible! The Grand Priest shouted, his voice filled with both anger and disbelief. Lord Zeno, strip the aquafoam from your body. Every last trace of it. You're no longer an Omni. How can you still hold dominion over Universe 7? His fury erupted as he descended to Venus in a blinding flash, slamming into the planet with such force that its axis shifted violently. The entire landscape trembled, oceans of molten rock spilling like waves before the planet's rotation stabilized once more. He stood there, seething, as his frustration boiled over. Above him, Gohan hovered in silence, his sharp mind racing. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but his instincts told him it had everything to do with Goku. Despite his father's unconscious state, Gohan could sense a strange new energy beginning to manifest within him. It was unlike anything he had encountered before. Not ki, but something equally profound. This energy, Gohan muttered to himself, his eyes wide with astonishment as he studied the faint glow radiating from Goku's body. It feels fundamental, like a primal force of existence, just like Kai. But how is that possible? I thought Kai was the only life energy there was. Every living being possesses ki. But this is different. The realization sent a shiver down his spine. Is this what allows Father, and even Vegeta, to tap into the power of the Omni? He wondered aloud, his voice tinged with both awe and confusion. Gohan's gaze lingered on his father's prone form. His mind was awash with questions, but none more pressing than one. Father, he said softly, his voice almost breaking, in death, what have you become? The Grand Priest, meanwhile, was no longer interested in theatric. His piercing gaze snapped back to Goku's motionless body, his fury sharpening into deadly intent. He began to stride forward, each step a declaration of his final resolve. His patience had run out. He would end this mortal now. Gohan's sharp eyes caught the subtle movement of the Grand Priest's fingers. The deity's hand moved with deliberate precision, as if weaving invisible threads in the air. It was an ominous sight, one that made Gohan's heart pound. Then, just as suddenly, the Grand Priest stopped mid-step. His entire body froze in place, unable to move forward. His head jerked up with great effort, and his eyes locked onto Gohan, who hovered above him with an unyielding glare. To the untrained eye, it seemed as though the Grand Priest had stopped of his own accord, but beneath the surface, Gohan's ki manipulation had taken hold. Every one of the Grand Priest's 52 ki points, the vital conduits of energy within his body, remained blocked. But Gohan wasn't content with simply sealing them. He had threaded them together using an intricate web of ki,
connecting them all back to himself. The strain was immense, beads of sweat forming on Gohan's brow as he focused on maintaining the technique. It was like holding the strings of a puppet, except his opponent was no ordinary puppet. This was the Grand Priest. The technique, which Gohan now realized could be described as ki bending, allowed him to manipulate the very flow of energy within another being's body. "You can't move, can you?" Gohan said, his voice steady despite the tension in his muscles. "As long as I hold this connection, you won't take another step." The Grand Priest's eyes narrowed. He strained against the invisible bonds, his overwhelming power surging in an attempt to break free. The effort caused the air around him to warp and tremble, but the Kai threads held firm. With a swift motion of his hand, Gohan's ki threads tightened like steel cables. A sickening crunch echoed through the air as the Grand Priest's legs buckled, the bones shattered by the overwhelming force. The deity dropped to his knees, his expression momentarily flickering with pain, though his composure quickly returned. "Stay away from my father!" Gohan roared, his aura blazing as his fingers moved with purpose, weaving a complex sequence of commands through the thread. His teeth clenched as he poured his will into one final move, a fatal strike meant to end the Grand Priest for good. "Now, die!" Gohan shouted, his voice reverberating with a mix of fury and desperation. With a flick of his fingers, he sent the command to snap the Grand Priest's neck, but something unexpected happened. The ki threads, his intricate web of control, were severed all at once. The strands snapped in midair, disintegrating into nothingness. Gohan's eyes widened, his heart pounding in disbelief. "But how?" Gohan stammered, his voice laced with shock. "This shouldn't be possible. To remove my threads, you'd have to break down into raw matter and reform yourself. That's the only way. Unless..." His voice trailed off as a realization struck him like a thunderbolt. His fists trembled as he shouted, You've mastered the 101 levels of Kaioken, haven't you? You know how to manipulate ki on that scale?" The Grand Priest's expression remained calm, but a faint smirk tugged at his lips. "No, I haven't," he said simply, his voice steady. "My body is not compatible with the Kaioken. While I do possess ki, my physiology lacks the necessary attributes to sustain such a technique. I gave up on that path long ago." Gohan's brow furrowed in confusion, but the Grand Priest continued, his tone patient, as though explaining a lesson to a student. "However, just because I cannot use Kaioken doesn't mean I didn't study it," the Grand Priest said. "And what I learned was far more valuable than mastering the technique itself. You see, Kaioken and ki in general is riddled with flaws. Its over-reliance on the life energy of the body leaves it vulnerable. Knowing this, I sought alternatives." He took a deliberate breath, as though savoring the moment of revelation. "One way to counter your technique is regeneration. A being with the right regenerative abilities can break free from your ki manipulation. They don't need to break down into matter. They can simply regenerate from a single cell. That cell, called the muscle cell, possesses its own life energy and operates independently of ki. By focusing on that single point, one can rebuild themselves even under complete ki suppression." Gohan's expression hardened as he tried to process the Grand Priest's explanation. "You regenerated?" he asked, his voice tight. "Indeed," the Grand Priest replied, "and my regenerative abilities extend far beyond what most beings can achieve. But even that wasn't necessary in this case." He gestured to himself with a subtle flourish. "Because I don't rely solely on ki. I have mastery over 2 additional fundamental elements, Mona and Reietsu. When you blocked my ki points, I simply switched my energy source." The deity's voice turned sharper, his eyes narrowing. "Rashi, the energy I'm using now doesn't function like ki. It isn't the natural life element of the body, so it doesn't rely on ki points. Your threads had no effect on it." Gohan's mind raced as he tried to piece together the implications of what he was hearing. Though much of the explanation was beyond his understanding, one thing was painfully clear. His plan to incapacitate the Grand Priest had failed entirely. "You see now, don't you?" the Grand Priest said, his tone dripping with superiority. "Your little rebellion was doomed from the start. You were never going to defeat me. All you've managed to do is prolong the inevitable." Gohan's fists clenched tightly, his body trembling with rage, as the Grand Priest rose to his feet, his shattered legs now fully restored. The deity's aura flared with renewed intensity, a terrifying reminder of the vast gulf in power between them. The Grand Priest turned his gaze to Goku, still lying motionless on the ground. "Now, Saiyan, be a good boy and watch," he said with chilling finality. "Watch as I kill your father." The scene shifted to planet Namek, its serene green-tinted skies and still blue waters creating a deceptive sense of calm. At the heart of a quiet Namekian village, a group of familiar faces gathered around Elder Guru, a descendant of the Great Elder who had once helped Earth's warriors long ago. Their expressions were somber as they discussed the catastrophic events unfolding across the multiverse. The destruction of Earth weighed heavily on everyone's minds, and the question loomed: should they wish it back now or wait? "This plan makes no sense," Piccolo said firmly, his sharp gaze fixed on the Elder. His arms were crossed, his tone resolute. "If we wish Earth and everyone else back now, we'll just be painting a target on their heads. The multiverse is still in chaos. We need to stay out of sight and let everyone think we're dead, at least until the Saiyans handle the situation." "You're wrong, Piccolo," Krillin countered, stepping forward with urgency in his voice. "We should prioritize bringing everyone back. Laying low might keep us safe for now, but Goku and the others can't fight at their best if they're constantly worrying about us. You know that." The room grew quiet as everyone absorbed Krillin's words. For a moment, even Piccolo seemed to waver. But before he could respond, Elder Guru interjected. "Krillin has a point," Guru said slowly, his voice deep and contemplative. "But Piccolo's caution is not unfounded. Wishing Earth back now could expose us to even greater danger. It is a difficult choice." Finally, after a heated debate, the group reluctantly agreed to follow Piccolo's advice. They would remain hidden on Namek, waiting for the storm to pass. However, fate had other plans. The tranquility of the village shattered in an instant as a dark presence descended from the sky. A massive figure landed just outside the village, his arrival shaking the ground beneath him. The air around him seemed heavy, almost suffocating, as he strode toward the village with deliberate steps. The intruder was Azazel, a demon with an aura so malevolent it made the Namekians tremble with dread. His crimson eyes scanned the village, locking onto the energy he sought. Piccolo's power in particular piqued his interest, a smirk tugging at his lips. Inside the chamber, Elder Guru's face paled as he clutched his staff tightly. "A great evil has come to this world," he said, his voice trembling. "This being, it brings death to us all." The Z-Fighters sprang into action. Krillin, Master Roshi, and androids 17 and 18 quickly readied themselves, while Piccolo stood at the front, his eyes narrowed in determination. The group exited the chamber cautiously, their movements tense as they made their way toward the village entrance. Standing beside them, Bulma and Chi-Chi exchanged worried glances. Bulma's face was pale with fear. "What if it's the gods?" she said, her voice shaking. "What if they've come to punish us because of what Goku and the others have done?" Chi-Chi clutched her son Goten tightly to her chest. "I won't let you fight," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I lost Gohan. I can't lose you too." The tension grew thicker with every step as they neared the edge of the village. The Z-Fighters could feel the malevolence emanating from the figure ahead, yet there was something strange about it. "Why can't I sense his energy?" Piccolo asked, his voice sharp and confused. "Me neither," Krillin said, his tone equally alarmed. Master Roshi stroked his beard thoughtfully. "If we can't sense it, that means one thing," he said grimly. "He's some kind of deity." Piccolo's eyes narrowed. "A deity, huh?" he muttered. "Then why is he here?" At the edge of the village, the group finally laid eyes on their uninvited guest. Azazel stood tall, his hands clasped behind his back like a martial arts master, his expression one of calm superiority. The demon's dark armor glinted in the Namekian sunlight, and his gaze was fixed squarely on Piccolo. "By chance, are you Piccolo?" Azazel asked, his tone smooth and deliberate. Piccolo's eyes never left the intruder as he stepped forward, his guard raised. "Yes," he said cautiously, "I am Piccolo, but I'm afraid I don't know who you are." Azazel's smirk widened slightly. "Good," he said. "That makes this even more entertaining." "I'm Azazel," the demon said, his voice smooth and deceptively calm, his crimson eyes locked onto Piccolo. "And as for why I'm here, well, I've come for you, of course. Would it be too much to ask for you to come with me willingly? No force, no mess." Piccolo's eyes narrowed, his muscles tensing as his guard remained firmly raised. "You're crazy if you think I'd go anywhere with you. I don't even know who you are," he shouted, his voice carrying the weight of both defiance and suspicion. Azazel chuckled. a dark and hollow sound that sent a chill through the air. His expression twisted into a sinister grin, one that exuded both malice and amusement. "Because," he said, "if you don't, I'll have to kill every mortal on this planet. Surely that changes your perspective, doesn't it?" The demon's words lingered in the air, thick and oppressive like a storm cloud ready to burst. His grin widened, revealing teeth that seemed to gleam unnaturally, as if he derived true pleasure from the chaos he promised. The certainty in his tone, the malevolent gleam in his eyes. This wasn't idle talk. Azazel's thirst for destruction was palpable, and it sent a chill through the group. The Z-Fighters exchanged uneasy glances, each silently calculating their next move. Their resolve was strong, but this foe was unlike anything they had ever faced. No one dared break the tense silence, except Chi-Chi. With a sharp intake of breath, she stepped forward, her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her fiery determination burned brighter than her fear, and her voice quivered only slightly as she addressed the demon. "You think you can scare us into doing what you want?" she snapped, her words laced with a venomous fury. "Not a chance." Azazel's mocking tone cut through her defiance. 3 seconds, that's all you get," he said with deliberate slowness, drawing out every syllable as if savoring his dominance. 1, 2, you don't get to make demands here," Chi-Chi shouted, her voice slicing through his countdown. She planted herself directly in front of Piccolo, her small frame almost laughably dwarfed by his imposing figure. Yet her presence was anything but insignificant. "Piccolo's staying. Do you hear me? He's family, and we don't abandon family. You'll have to go through me first." Bulma smirked, stepping beside her with folded arms. "Chi-Chi's got a point," she said, her tone light but unwavering. "But unnamed husband, huh? Now that's a plot twist. Goku's going to love this one." Piccolo shifted uncomfortably, his green complexion darkening to a deeper hue. "Focus, Bulma," he said sharply, though his voice carried a tinge of embarrassment. "This isn't the time for jokes." Azazel's grin vanished, his face hardening into something far more sinister. "Enough," he said flatly, his voice dropping into an ominous growl. "If this is the choice you've made, so be it." The air around him seemed to warp as his energy began to rise. The Z-Fighters instinctively braced themselves, their senses flaring. But then nothing. No signature, no pressure, no trace of Azazel's power, at least not to most of them. Piccolo's keen senses caught it though, and what he felt made his stomach drop. His sharp eyes narrowed, his focus locking onto Azazel with the intensity of a hawk. The aura surrounding the demon wasn't just strong, it was otherworldly, immeasurable, suffocating. "His power, it's unreal," Piccolo muttered under his breath, beads of sweat forming on his brow. He forced himself to stay composed, though inside, his mind raced. Beerus, the god of destruction, was a force they had seen in action, terrifying, unmatchable. But Azazel, his energy might even surpass that. Azazel stood motionless, his arms still behind his back, his expression calm and unreadable, yet his aura was anything but tranquil. The atmosphere thickened, as though the very air was bending under the weight of his presence. His gaze bored into Piccolo, sharp and predatory, like a hunter studying its cornered prey. "Well then," Azazel said, his voice unnervingly soft, but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut steel. He tilted his head slightly, a faint glimmer of amusement flashing in his eyes. "Shall we begin?" Azazel's power surged, and for the first time, the group could physically feel the ground tremble beneath their feet. The fight was imminent. Azazel's movements were a blur, effortless, deadly, and far too fast for any of the Z-Fighters to track. One moment, he stood motionless, exuding a quiet menace. The next, he was inches from Krillin, his fist already in motion. Boom! The sound of the impact reverberated across the battlefield like a shockwave, rattling nearby trees and kicking up a whirlwind of dust. For a moment, it seemed as though nothing had happened. Krillin's body stood rigid, as if frozen in place. Then, like a delayed reaction in a lagging video game, his expression twisted in pain, and the force of the gut punch sent him rocketing upward. The sheer power behind the attack was staggering. Blood burst from Krillin's mouth in a gruesome spray, and his body sailed high into the sky, tearing through the clouds like a missile. "Krillin!" 18's voice broke the stunned silence. Her scream filled with raw panic. Without hesitation, she launched herself upward, her energy surging as she raced to catch him before gravity could claim its prize. She knew all too well that a fall from such a height would be lethal. But just as she reached for him, a hand shot out of nowhere. Azazel, his fingers closed around her ankle like an iron clamp, stopping her mid-flight. "And where do you think you're going?" he taunted, his voice calm but dripping with cruelty. With a casual swing, he hurled her downward, slamming her into the ground like a meteor. The moment her body struck, the earth trembled violently. The resulting crater was massive, a jagged wound carved into the planet's surface. At its center, 18 lay motionless, her energy flickering weakly as dust and debris settled around her unconscious form. Azazel barely had time to relish his handiwork before 17 materialized behind him. The android's speed was breathtaking, his appearance more like a flash of light than a physical movement. Without hesitation, he unleashed a spinning kick aimed directly at the back of Azazel's neck. Crack! The force of the blow was immense, its sound echoing like a thunderclap. Sparks of energy danced along the edges of 17's attack, creating a shockwave that uprooted trees and sent tremors rippling through the battlefield. Yet to 17's growing horror, Azazel remained unmoved, not even a flinch.
"Was that supposed to hurt?" Azazel asked, his voice as calm as ever. He glanced sideways at 17, his expression more amused than annoyed. Frustration burned in 17's eyes, and he unleashed a relentless barrage of attacks, kicks, punches, energy bursts, each one faster and stronger than the last. His strikes tore through the air, their force scattering debris and leveling what remained of the nearby landscape. Buildings crumbled, trees snapped like twigs, and the wind howled with the sheer velocity of his movement. But Azazel didn't budge. Every attack met the same fate. Nothing. No matter how hard 17 hit, Azazel stood rooted in place, an immovable object against the android's unstoppable force. Word soul magic, stand still.
The words came from Azazel, soft and almost dismissive, but their effect was instantaneous. 17 froze mid-strike, his body locking up as if bound by invisible chains. He struggled, his muscles straining against the unseen force, but he couldn't so much as twitch a finger. "What is this?" 17 shouted, his voice raw with frustration. "He hasn't even touched me. Why can't I move?" Azazel stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "It's simple," he said with a smirk. "You're a puppet now, and I pull the strings." Then, with a speed that defied comprehension, Azazel delivered a devastating sidekick. The force shattered 17's arm with a sickening crunch, the impact sending him hurtling through the air. His body tore through a Namekian house, reducing it to rubble, before slamming into a distant mountain. The collision was so violent that the entire peak seemed to quake, leaving a jagged scar in its wake. 17's body slumped at the base of the mountain, battered and broken. His energy signature flickered weakly, and it was clear he wouldn't be getting up anytime soon. Azazel stood in the center of the battlefield, his aura radiating supremacy, as if daring anyone else to step forward. The landscape around him was in ruins, a testament to the carnage he had wrought in mere moments. The Z-fighters were down, but his expression showed no signs of satisfaction, only boredom, as if this was nothing more than a warm-up. Azazel raised his hand, holding the mysterious artifact aloft. Its smooth, dark surface began to glow an ominous red, pulsating with a menacing rhythm as it hovered in the air above him. The atmosphere shifted, the air growing heavy and electric with raw energy. Suddenly, the artifact began to siphon the life energy from the fallen Z-fighters. Streams of glowing essence were pulled from Krillin and 17, their bodies jerking slightly as if in protest before going completely still. The horrifying realization struck Piccolo like a thunderbolt. "No!" he shouted, his voice breaking through the rising tension. The draining process was rapid and brutal. Within moments, the glow dimmed, and both Krillin and 17's life forces were gone, leaving their bodies lifeless. Azazel caught the flask as it fell back to the ground, inspecting it with a clinical detachment. The once red glow faded into a faint green. "Not quite full yet," he remarked, slipping the artifact back into his satchel with a satisfied smirk. "But close. A few more, and it'll be complete." Piccolo stared in disbelief, his mind reeling. He couldn't sense any trace of life from Krillin or 17. It was as if they had been erased from existence. "Krillin!" he called out desperately, his voice shaking. No response. The truth was undeniable, but Piccolo's heart refused to accept it. Nearby, 18's grief turned to rage. Her fists clenched, her energy flaring wildly as she prepared to charge. 17! She screamed, her voice raw with pain and fury. She launched herself at Azazel, her speed fueled by sheer desperation. And "Stop!" Piccolo's arm shot out, catching her by the shoulder and halting her advance. "Are you insane? You can't defeat him. You'd just be throwing your life away." "He killed them," 18 shouted back, tears brimming in her eyes. Her voice cracked under the weight of her emotions. "My husband! My brother!
You can't expect me to just stand here and do nothing. You have to think about your daughter, Piccolo said firmly, his voice steady despite the chaos. If you die here, she'll have no one. Krillin would never forgive me if I let anything happen to you or Marin. Take her, Chi-Chi, and Bulma, and hide. I'll handle this. 18's energy faltered as she stared at Piccolo, her emotions warring within her. After a long pause, she finally nodded, tears streaming down her face. You'd better make him pay for this, she whispered, her voice trembling. Piccolo didn't respond. Instead, he stepped forward, his gaze locking onto Azazel with a fiery determination. His body began to emit a radiant aura, and the ground beneath him trembled violently. Cracks split the earth as waves of power surged outward, shaking planet Namek to its core. The sky darkened, swirling with storm clouds as Piccolo's transformation began.
Is that Piccolo? Murmured one of the Namekians, watching from a safe distance. The ground beneath their feet quaked, and they clung to one another for balance. He's so powerful. I've never seen anything like this. He's like a god. The junior elder guru stepped forward, his expression a mixture of awe and solemnity. Yes, he confirmed, his voice carrying the weight of ancient knowledge. Piccolo has achieved something extraordinary. He has fused with one of the mighty dragons. Shenron! Another Namekian exclaimed, their voice a mix of disbelief and wonder. The Earth Dragon? How is that even possible?
Guru nodded gravely. Not only is it possible, but it has magnified his power tenfold. Piccolo is no longer merely a Namekian warrior. He is something far greater. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. But isn't that supposed to be impossible? One of them asked hesitantly. A fusion of this magnitude, wouldn't it destroy him from the inside out? No Namekian body could handle that kind of power. You're correct, Guru replied, his voice steady but tinged with worry. Many have tried before, and all have failed, their bodies torn apart by the sheer force of the dragon's energy. The Namekians stood silent, their wide eyes reflecting both awe and fear as they recalled the history of the forbidden fusion. Long ago, when the Saiyans had first come to Namek, a bold warrior named Pu had attempted the same fusion. It was meant to grant him the strength to protect his people, but the power of the dragon had overwhelmed him, ripping him apart from within. Since then, it was accepted as a grim truth. No Namekian body could endure such power. The idea had been buried, deemed impossible, and never attempted again. Yet now, before their very eyes, Piccolo had defied that truth. Not only had he succeeded, but the transformation was breathtaking.
Unbelievable, murmured one of the elder Namekians, his voice trembling. He actually did it. Guru, who had been quietly observing, finally stood. His frail form seemed to radiate a newfound strength as he addressed the crowd. This was always his destiny, he said, his voice carrying a gravitas that silenced the murmurs. From the moment Piccolo separated from Kami, his path was set. Every trial, every battle, it has all led him to this moment.
He took a slow step forward, leaning on his staff, his gaze fixed on Piccolo's radiant figure. He will become the first god of the Namekians. Gasps rippled through the gathered Namekians. Their astonishment only deepened as Piccolo's transformation completed, revealing his new form, Orange Piccolo. His physique was more imposing than ever, his muscles carved with precision, and his skin glowing with a deep, fiery orange hue that seemed to radiate power. His antennae twitched slightly, and his intense gaze never wavered from Azazel. Piccolo shifted into his fighting stance, his body poised and ready. His aura flared around him, creating tremors that shook the ground beneath their feet. Azazel, he said, his voice steady and deep. This ends now. Azazel raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Is that it? He said, his tone dripping with disdain. His crimson eyes scanned Piccolo, assessing the newfound power. To him, it was undeniably impressive on a mortal scale, but to a primordial being like himself, it was little more than a flicker in the vastness of his own strength.
This is not nearly enough to fill the flask, Azazel muttered, almost disappointed. His eyes narrowed, and he spoke more to himself than anyone else. I suppose I should move on to Goku after this. The fool has already lost his divinity, but even in his diminished state, his power should suffice to half fill the flask. He turned his full attention back to Piccolo, his expression sharpening into a cold sneer. Well, no sense wasting time. I'll take your energy first. Azazel extended his hand, his palm facing Piccolo. Come to me, he commanded. Before Piccolo could react, an invisible force yanked him forward, dragging him helplessly across the battlefield toward Azazel's outstretched hand. The demon's grip closed around Piccolo's throat, lifting him effortlessly into the air. The Namekian warrior struggled against the crushing hold, his fingers clawing at Azazel's iron-like grip. Azazel's smirk widened. "This is the best your kind has to offer?" he said mockingly. "Pathetic." Piccolo's eyes narrowed, and in an instant, his Kai flared to life. He summoned a concentrated blast of energy in his hand and fired it directly into Azazel's stomach at point-blank range. The explosion rocked the area, causing Azazel's grip to falter just enough for Piccolo to capitalize. Using the momentary opening, Piccolo swung his leg upward, planting his knee firmly into Azazel's chest. The force knocked the demon slightly off balance, and Piccolo flipped backward, breaking free of the grip and landing gracefully on the ground. Azazel straightened, brushing off his chest, as if the attack had been little more than an inconvenience. "You've got some fight in you after all," he remarked, his voice laced with mock admiration. Piccolo didn't waste any time. In a blur of movement, he closed the distance between them, his speed now amplified to a staggering degree. Before Azazel could react, Piccolo's fist connected with his face in a thunderous punch, sending the demon skidding backward. The force of the blow wasn't enough to launch Azazel far, but it was enough to make him stagger, if only for a moment. Piccolo dropped back into his fighting stance, his orange aura crackling around him like wildfire. His breaths came steady, his focus unbroken. Azazel slowly turned his head back to Piccolo, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, a chilling, predatory grin. "Interesting," he said softly, the air around him beginning to darken ominously. "Perhaps this won't be as dull as I thought." The air sizzled with tension, raw energy crackling across the battlefield. Every breath was a storm, every heartbeat a drum roll echoing through the vast expanse of Namek's darkened sky. Piccolo stood at the epicenter, his orange aura roaring like an untamed blaze, casting his towering frame in a fiery glow. His muscles coiled like springs, ready to snap into action. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked onto the figure before him, Azazel. Azazel, a terrifying contrast, exuded an almost unsettling calm. His crimson eyes shimmered with faint amusement, his lips curled into a predator's grin that spoke of superiority and sadistic delight. His dark cloak fluttered slightly in the residual energy swirling around them. He tilted his head, his voice a guttural growl, yet oddly composed. "Show me," Azazel commanded, his tone carrying an undertone of mockery. "Show me why you believe you stand a chance against me. Show me the glimmer of hope you cling to, so I can snuff it out." Piccolo didn't reply. He didn't need to. Instead, he roared, the sound echoing like a battle horn. With explosive force, he launched himself forward. The ground beneath his feet shattered, sending chunks of rock and debris flying in all directions. In a flash, Piccolo was upon Azazel, fists blazing as he unleashed a relentless flurry of strikes. Each punch was a symphony of violence, each kick a hammer blow to the planet itself. His attacks were precise, calculated, aiming for weak points on Azazel's head, torso, and limbs. The force behind every blow could have leveled mountains. Shockwaves radiated outward, distorting the air and shaking the very ground. Azazel, however, moved with the grace of a phantom. His defenses were impeccable. He parried Piccolo's right hook with a flick of his wrist, sidestepped a devastating knee aimed at his ribs, and leaned back just enough to evade a crushing elbow strike that would have collapsed his jaw. His motions were fluid, almost lazy, as though he were toying with his prey. But Piccolo wasn't finished. Pivoting sharply, he spun low, his legs slicing through the air in an attempt to sweep Azazel off his feet. Azazel leaped effortlessly, a smirk playing on his lips. Yet Piccolo anticipated the move. With lightning speed, his arms shot out, grabbing Azazel midair. "Got you!" Piccolo snarled, slamming Azazel into the ground with a thunderous crash. The impact was cataclysmic. The earth quaked as a massive crater formed beneath Azazel's body, dirt and shattered rock exploding outward in a violent storm. Piccolo didn't let up. Raising both hands, he summoned his ki, the energy glowing fiercely between his palms. "Take this, you demon!" he bellowed, firing a rapid succession of ki blasts directly into the crater. Each explosion roared like thunder, the bursts lighting up the battlefield in fiery brilliance. The force of the attack rattled Namek to its core, waves of energy rippling through the atmosphere. When the last explosion subsided, silence fell. Dust and smoke filled the air, obscuring the massive crater. Piccolo hovered above it, his chest heaving as he caught his breath, his sharp eyes searching for any sign of his foe. The tension was palpable. Then, cutting through the haze, a voice emerged, calm, mocking, and chilling. Pathetic. The smoke cleared, and there stood Azazel, completely unscathed. His dark aura crackled around him like black lightning, each arc humming with raw, unrelenting power. His smirk widened, his crimson eyes narrowing in derision. "Is that truly the extent of your power, guardian of the Namekians?" Azazel sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. "I expected more. If this is all you're capable of, then I'm afraid there is no hope for you." Piccolo gritted his teeth, frustration surging within him like a raging storm. Sweat trickled down his face, his mind racing. "How's this possible?" he thought. "Even in my orange form, he's still treating me like a warm-up act. No, I am hurting him. My attacks are landing. They have to be. He's just hiding the damage." He clenched his fists, his aura flaring even brighter as he forced himself to push aside doubt. This wasn't over. Not yet. He wouldn't let it be. Azazel, however, seemed bored, his smirk unwavering as he took a casual step forward. The battlefield quaked violently as Piccolo raised both hands, channeling every ounce of his energy into a glowing, pulsating orb. The light from the attack illuminated the battlefield in brilliant hues of orange and gold, casting long, jagged shadows across the scarred terrain. The air around him grew heavy, vibrating with the sheer intensity of his power. The ground beneath his feet cracked and trembled, unable to bear the force he was summoning. With a primal scream, Piccolo hurled the massive energy orb toward Azazel. It tore through the air like a meteor, its light carving a fiery trail as it closed in on its target. Azazel didn't flinch, his crimson eyes locked onto the incoming attack with cold precision. At the last possible moment, he extended a single hand, palm facing the orb. The massive attack came to a dead stop mid-air, quivering violently as if resisting an unseen force. Azazel smirked, his fingers curling slightly as he took control of the energy. With an almost casual flick of his wrist, the orb spun around and rocketed back toward Piccolo. "What?" Piccolo's eyes widened in shock. He barely had time to react. Crossing his arms in front of him, he braced himself as the attack slammed into him with earth-shaking force. The explosion that followed was deafening, a wave of smoke and debris engulfing the area. Piccolo was thrown backward, skidding across the ground before coming to a stop amidst the rubble. As the dust began to settle, his silhouette emerged. His arms were singed, the skin blackened and charred, but already beginning to heal thanks to his regenerative ability. His shirt had been incinerated in the blast, leaving only his pants intact. Azazel stood unmoving, watching Piccolo with an almost playful expression. "Not bad," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "But you're still weak. Why struggle so much when you're not going to die anyway?" Piccolo's aura flared to life once more, his energy surging with renewed determination. He gritted his teeth, his fists clenching as he prepared to charge. "I don't need to die to stop you," he growled. In a flash, Piccolo rushed forward, his movements a blur of speed and precision. His fists and feet became a relentless whirlwind of strikes. He threw punch after punch, each one aiming for a vulnerable spot. Azazel deflected most of the blows, his hands moving with almost surgical precision. But Piccolo's attacks weren't just brute force, they were calculated. A powerful punch connected with Azazel's ribs, the impact echoing like a cannon shot. A knee followed, driving into Azazel's stomach, causing the primordial being to grunt slightly. Then came a devastating kick to the side of the head, sending Azazel staggering a step to the side. For a moment, it seemed like Piccolo was gaining the upper hand. His strikes had weight, force, and precision. Each one left a ripple of energy in the air, and the ground quaked beneath their feet with every exchange. But the brief glimmer of hope was snuffed out in an instant. Azazel caught Piccolo's fist mid-strike with a sharp, calculated movement. His grip was ironclad, twisting Piccolo's arm and forcing the Namekian to his knees. "Down, boy," Azazel commanded, his voice laced with mockery. Piccolo struggled, his muscles straining as he tried to break free, but Azazel's strength was overwhelming. His free hand began to glow with a dark, malevolent energy, tendrils of black lightning crackling around his fingers. "You struggle well," Azazel said, his tone dripping with disdain. "But all your strength, all your determination, it's meaningless against a primordial being like me." The dark energy surged forward, slamming into Piccolo's chest like a tidal wave. The force was unimaginable, hurling him through the air. Piccolo's body collided with a nearby mountain, the impact shattering the rock face and sending massive boulders tumbling down. Lava seeped from the fractured surface, the planet itself reacting to the sheer power on display. For a moment, Piccolo's body was motionless. Then, with a grunt of effort, he pushed himself back to his feet. His breathing was ragged, blood dripping from his mouth. but his fiery determination burned brighter than ever. "I'm not done yet," Piccolo growled, his voice rough but resolute. His aura erupted once more, brighter and more intense than before. The ground quaked violently as his energy surged, cracks forming beneath his feet as the planet seemed to tremble at his power. "I will defeat you," Piccolo roared, spreading his arms wide as he began charging his most devastating technique. His voice echoed across the battlefield, filled with both anger and unshakable resolve. "I made Goku a promise to protect everyone, even if it cost me my life." The energy between his fingers spiraled, a sharp, concentrated beam forming at the tips. The air around him shimmered with heat as his ki condensed to its most lethal form. Special beam cannon! The battlefield was an apocalyptic nightmare. The air was thick with the acrid stench of scorched earth, and the ground was fractured, split into jagged chasms that bled molten lava. Entire sections of the planet were destabilized, with mountains crumbling into the void and oceans evaporating under the sheer intensity of the energy unleashed. Piccolo stood at the center of it all, his body trembling, his energy a faint flicker of what it had been moments ago, but his spirit burned fiercely. Above him, Azazel floated effortlessly, a dark silhouette against the carnage. His crimson eyes glowed with a predatory light, and the smirk on his face conveyed nothing but contempt. From all over the planet, ki surged into Piccolo's spiraling energy attack as he prepared his final gambit. The power was colossal, shaking the atmosphere itself as the glowing beam condensed, becoming sharper, deadlier. The ground beneath Piccolo's feet splintered further, giving way to his unrelenting force. The air around him grew dense, heavy with the vibrations of raw energy. "I assume you won't be a coward and evade this attack," Piccolo snarled, his voice hoarse but laced with determination. Azazel tilted his head, his smirk widening, as if amused by the audacity of the challenge. "Oh, a final gambit?" he said, mockery dripping from every word. He extended a hand dismissively. "Bring it!" With a roar that shook the heavens, Piccolo unleashed the special beam cannon. The spiraling lance of energy tore through the air like a cosmic drill, its light piercing the darkened sky. The force of the attack was enough to create a visible shockwave that rippled across the planet. The collision was immediate and cataclysmic, striking Azazel dead on and erupting into a blinding explosion of light and energy. The resulting blast was nothing short of apocalyptic. A quarter of the planet was plunged into chaos as the ground was ripped apart. Oceans boiled, molten lava spewed from newly formed fissures, and the sky was set ablaze with the energy of the attack. The sheer magnitude of the explosion was enough to make the very atoms of the planet vibrate, as though on the verge of coming apart. Elder Guru, watching from a distance, staggered to his feet, his aged form trembling as he bore witness to the devastation. His wide eyes reflected the destruction, and his voice was filled with disbelief. There, God," he murmured, his tone a mixture of awe and despair. Did a Namekian truly unleash such catastrophic power? The realization sank in, heavy and profound. Is our race truly this powerful? Guru thought, his mind racing. Piccolo is the future of the Namekians. I cannot let him die. I won't let him die, even if it costs me my own life. A grim resolve filled him as he prepared to intervene if needed. But then, as the smoke cleared and the light faded, a figure emerged from the devastation. Azazel stepped out unscathed, his dark aura flaring ominously. He chuckled low and menacing, shaking his head as though amused by the entire ordeal. "Impressive," he admitted, his voice calm yet chilling, but still futile. Piccolo staggered backward, his breathing labored and his muscles screaming in protest. His body trembled under the strain, his energy all but spent. "How?" he rasped, disbelief etched across his face. "How are you this strong? I gave that attack everything I had." Azazel's smirk deepened, his crimson eyes glowing with condescension. "You don't even understand who you're fighting, do you, mortal?" he sneered. He raised his hand, and black tendrils of energy slithered outward, coiling around Piccolo like serpents. The tendrils tightened, lifting him off the ground effortlessly, squeezing the life out of him. "I am no mere god," Azazel continued, his voice cold and commanding. "I am Azazel, a primordial being, the true master of destruction energy." He gestured to the chaos around them, his tone dripping with disdain. This is child's play." Piccolo struggled against the tendrils, his every muscle straining, but the grip was unrelenting. Azazel continued, his voice like a knife slicing through the heavy air. "To show you how futile your efforts truly are,
I haven't even used destruction energy once in this fight. That's how insignificant you are to me." He smirked, his eyes gleaming with dark intent. "But your power, this new transformation of yours, it intrigues me. It will serve a higher purpose." His grin widened as he added, "Master Zarama will be pleased. He'll use your energy, your very essence, to revive the demon race. You see, he sacrificed everything for this goal, even the life of his son, Arak. He won't stop now, and neither will I." Piccolo's mind raced even as his body screamed in agony. The tendrils tightened further, sending jolts of pain coursing through him. Yet, even in the face of despair, his determination burned brighter. "I don't care what you are," Piccolo growled, his voice ragged but defiant. His fists clenched tightly, and his orange aura flickered faintly, refusing to die. "I'll keep fighting until my last breath. I made a promise to Goku. A promise to protect everyone, no matter what, even if it costs me my life." For a fleeting moment, Azazel's smile faltered, his expression betraying a hint of respect. "Admirable," he admitted quietly, but ultimately meaningless. He raised his hand, dark energy coiling around his palm like a storm, preparing to deliver the final blow. The battlefield was now a wasteland of craters and destruction, the air heavy with despair. Piccolo hung limply in the air, the tendrils sapping the last remnants of his strength. His orange aura flickered like a candle in a hurricane, a fragile defiance against the overwhelming darkness closing in. Below, the remaining Z-fighters gathered anxiously around the glowing orb set up by Guru, their eyes glued to the chaotic battlefield displayed within it. The sight was grim. Piccolo, their strongest remaining fighter, was losing. His aura, once a blazing testament to his determination, flickered weakly as Azazel's relentless power overwhelmed him. The Z-fighters' faces mirrored the dread that gripped their hearts. Videl paced back and forth, her fists clenched tightly, her voice shaking as she finally broke the silence. "We can't just stand here," she shouted, her eyes darting between the orb and the others. "We have to do something. He's going to kill Piccolo." Chi-Chi, holding Goten tightly to her chest, nodded grimly. Her usual fire was dimmed, but not extinguished. "And then he'll come for us," she said darkly. "But what can we do? We're no match for that monster." Her grip on Goten tightened, and the young boy buried his face in her shoulder, sensing his mother's fear. Oolong cowered behind a nearby boulder, his pig-like ears twitching nervously. His voice cracked as he stammered, "You're all crazy if you think we stand a chance. Did you see what he did to Krillin in 17? They didn't even have time to scream." His trembling increased as he added, "He killed them without a second thought, and now he's going to kill us." "Enough," Android 18 snapped, her icy tone slicing through the rising panic. She stood tall, her fists clenched at her sides, trembling with barely suppressed fury. "I know we're outmatched," she said, her voice steadying, "but if we don't do something, none of us are leaving this planet alive." Bulma, her mind racing, looked up sharply. "What about the evil containment wave?" she asked, her face lighting up with the memory of the ancient technique. "We used it on Beerus before. It could buy us some time." Roshi frowned, shaking his head slowly. "Forget it," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of experience. "It won't work. The evil containment wave barely managed to hold Beerus for a short time, and that was with perfect execution. This Azazel creature, he's in a league of his own. He's too powerful." "But Beerus is a god of destruction," Videl protested, hope flickering in her voice. "If it worked on him, it might work here." Roshi sighed deeply, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I saw the fight between Beerus and Piccolo," he said, his voice low but steady. "Yes, Piccolo managed to hurt him. He put up an incredible fight. But Azazel is different. Look at him. You've seen it for yourself. Piccolo is completely outmatched. I'd bet my life on it. This being is more powerful than even Beerus." His words hung heavy in the air. Even 18, standing firm, faltered for a moment as the grim reality sank in. "We should still try it," Elder Guru interjected, leaning heavily on his staff. His voice was calm, but carried a grave urgency. "Even if it only buys us a few minutes, it might be enough for what I have planned." "What plan?" Bulma asked, her brow furrowing. "What could you possibly have in mind that requires just a few minutes?" Guru's wise eyes turned to the orb, where Piccolo's battered body continued to fight against the tendrils of dark energy binding him. "It is a desperate move," Guru admitted, his tone somber, "and it may fail. But it's the only choice we have. Either we act now or we perish together." The weight of his words silenced the group for a moment, the gravity of their situation sinking in. Chi-Chi's voice trembled with frustration as she spoke. "If you've got something,
anything that could give us a chance, then say it, Elder. What do you need from us? Guru's gaze shifted to the Earthlings. This move will require a sacrifice, he said gravely. Not from me. I've lived long enough. But from you, the decision will be yours. It will cost more than just power. It will cost someone their life. His words hit like a thunderclap, leaving the group stunned. Chiatsu floated closer, his pale face reflecting both fear and determination. What do you mean, Great Elder? He asked, his voice trembling. What kind of sacrifice? Roshi took a deep breath, his gaze shifting between the trembling group and Elder Guru. His normally lighthearted demeanor had vanished, replaced with a grim seriousness. Fusion, he said quietly, his voice steady yet heavy with understanding. His sharp eyes turned to Guru. That's what you're talking about, isn't it? You're suggesting another fusion. Elder Guru inclined his head slightly, his expression unreadable, but the silence that followed was confirmation enough. What kind of fusion? Videl asked, her voice tight with a mix of fear and confusion. Roshi adjusted his glasses and exhaled deeply. He's talking about Piccolo fusing with another dragon, he explained, his tone low but resolute. It's the only thing that makes sense. The ultimate sacrifice, it's gotta be tied to the Dragon Balls. If Piccolo fuses with Porunga, it'll give him the power he needs, but at a cost we can't ignore. The Dragon Balls, Bulma whispered, her face pale as the realization dawned. If we use them for this wish, we're giving them up for good, aren't we? Yes, Guru said solemnly, breaking his silence. His voice carried the weight of centuries, every word deliberate. You all saw what happened when Piccolo fused with Shenron. The Earth's Dragon Balls turned to stone, their power sealed for 1,000 years. If we call upon Porunga now and make the same wish, it will mean the end of Namek's Dragon Balls, permanently, for all your lifetimes. The Elder's gaze swept across the group, his words pressing down like the weight of the world. The Dragon Balls and the Namekians are intertwined. We created them, and in doing so, tied our essence to their power. Once Porunga is gone, there will be no bringing him or the Dragon Balls back. The weight of Guru's revelation settled heavily on the group. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was broken only by the distant rumble of the battlefield as Piccolo fought desperately against Azazel. Wait, Bulma finally said, her voice trembling. You're saying we'll lose any chance of bringing Krillin, 17, or anyone else back? No wishes, no second chances. If Earth is destroyed again, we won't be able to fix it? That's exactly what he's saying, Roshi replied, his voice solemn. He closed his eyes briefly, the words clearly weighing on him. This isn't just a gamble, it's a sacrifice. Videl took a shaky breath, her fists clenched tightly. No, she murmured, her voice breaking. What about Gohan? What if he— Her words caught in her throat as her mind raced with the possibilities. Tears welled in her eyes as her voice rose. What will happen to my Gohan? My son! Chi-Chi wailed, clutching Goten even tighter. Her cries became uncontrollable as the fear overwhelmed her. I already lost Goku. I can't lose Gohan too. Oolong, trembling, peeked out from behind his boulder. What's the point of saving the universe if there's no Earth left for us to live on? He whined, throwing his hands in the air. No food, no shelter, no women. Just kill me now. Get a hold of yourself, Android 18 snapped, her piercing tone cutting through the rising panic. Her fists trembled at her sides as she forced herself to speak. We don't have time for this. If we don't save Piccolo, none of this matters. Azazel will wipe us all out, and there won't be anyone left to bring back. Her words struck a chord, silencing the group momentarily. She took a deep breath, her voice softening. I don't like this either, not one bit. But what choice do we have? Krillin wouldn't want this, not if it meant the rest of us could survive. None of them would. Chi-Chi wiped at her face, though no more tears came. Something in 18's words had reached her. She squared her shoulders, her expression hardening. She said quietly, her voice shaking but firm. We don't have a choice, do we? Goku's not here. Vegeta, Broly, none of them are here to save us. Her voice cracked slightly, but she caught herself and pushed forward. We're all that's left. Her eyes closed briefly as a wave of pain washed over her. Goku, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Where are you? We need you. I need you. Her words hung in the air, echoing the despair that gripped the group. Above them, the orb continued to display the brutal clash as Piccolo fought against impossible odds. Oolong's face was a mask of panic as he darted glances at the group, his trembling hands gripping the edges of the boulder he cowered behind. You're seriously going to make that wish? He blurted, his voice cracking. Do you even understand what you're asking? No more wishes. None. What if something worse happens after this? What if we need them again? We'll never see them again. Chi-Chi spun on him, her voice raw with emotion as she shouted. What could be worse than this? Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her entire body trembling. Azazel will kill us all if we don't act. What's the point of worrying about the future when there might not be a future? The defeat in her voice was painfully clear, but beneath it burned an unyielding fire. Roshi stepped forward, his movement slower but deliberate, and placed a steadying hand on Oolong's shoulder. She's right, he said gently but firmly. This is it, Oolong. This is our only chance. If we don't take it, there won't be anyone left to worry about wishes or anything else. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Bulma, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, let out a sharp exhale and stood tall. Then let's do it, she said, her voice steady, despite the fear etched on her face. I hate it, but I'd rather fight for survival than just stand around waiting to be slaughtered. She turned sharply to Roshi, her eyes blazing with determination. Call Purunga, do it, now. We can't, Guru interrupted, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the tension like a blade. All eyes turned to him, his weathered face lined with the weight of centuries of wisdom. Not yet. What? Bulma snapped, her frustration bubbling to the surface. Why not? What are we waiting for? We cannot summon Purunga while Azazel is here, Guru explained, his tone measured but grave. If he senses Purunga, he'll destroy him instantly. That would end all hope, not just for us, but for the Dragon Balls and this planet. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. We need to trap him somehow. The evil containment wave you mentioned earlier, it could work, even if only for a few moments. That would give us the time we need to summon Purunga and make the wish without interruption. Videl stepped forward, her eyes wide with uncertainty. The evil containment wave, can we even pull it off? Didn't you say it might not hold someone this powerful? Master nodded solemnly. It's a gamble, he admitted, leaning heavily on his staff. But it's a gamble we must take. Even if it only holds him for seconds, those seconds could make all the difference. But who's going to perform it? Chi-Chi asked, her voice cracking under the weight of the decision. Who here even knows how to do it? Roshi straightened, his usual relaxed posture replaced with a resolve that made him seem taller, stronger. Piccolo, of course, he said. He's seen the technique being done many times. I'm confident that he can perform it. We just have to fill him in on the plan. Trust me, everyone, Master Roshi began, his tone uncharacteristically grave. I'd do it myself if I could, but I'm simply too weak to pull it off against a being that powerful. He adjusted his sunglasses, though his usual carefree demeanor was nowhere in sight. The evil containment wave isn't just some magic trick anyone can use on anyone. You need tremendous strength, enough to power through the sheer force of the struggle when sealing a being like that. The group hung on Roshi's every word. Even Android 18, who rarely wore her emotions, seemed concerned. She crossed her arms and tilted her head. So what you're saying is, even if someone learns the technique, it's not guaranteed to work, unless they're strong enough to handle the backlash. Exactly, Roshi confirmed with a nod. It's why we can't just spam this technique every time we face a villain. There's always a catch, and this one's a big one. But how do we let Piccolo in on the plan? Android 18 asked, glancing toward the battlefield, where shockwaves from the ongoing fight lit up the horizon. It's way too dangerous to get anywhere near that monster right now. Not while he's keeping his guard up. I'll take care of that, Elder Guru said, stepping forward. Despite his age and frailty, his presence carried a quiet authority. I can inform him telepathically. Without waiting for further discussion, the Namekian elder placed a finger on his forehead, his eyes closing as his thoughts reached out across the battlefield like a ripple in a calm lake. Far away, Piccolo stood battered and bloodied, his body barely holding together. His breathing was ragged, his vision blurred. A monstrous foe loomed before him, radiating malicious energy so dense it warped the air. Piccolo growled, spitting blood onto the ground as he steadied himself. Suddenly, a voice echoed in his mind, gentle yet familiar. Piccolo, my boy, can you hear me? Piccolo's eyes widened in disbelief. Great Elder, is that you? He muttered aloud, momentarily forgetting his pain. The voice carried a warmth that reminded him of simpler times, of guidance and wisdom. Yes, my son, Guru's voice reassured him. I can feel the toll this battle has taken on you. That creature, he's done a number on you. But don't lose hope. Your friends from Earth and I have devised a plan to turn the tide. Piccolo straightened slightly, his energy flickering. A plan? He asked, his voice hoarse. What kind of plan? You need more power, Piccolo. Guru explained. There's no other way. We're suggesting something unprecedented. Fusion with Purunga.
The mere suggestion stunned Piccolo. Fusion with Purunga? He repeated, his voice rising in disbelief. Despite his injuries, the notion seemed impossible to comprehend. Are you serious? Guru's voice remained steady. Yes, my boy, it's the only way. You've already fused with Nail and Shenron. A triple fusion is the next step. Piccolo's mind reeled. He thought back to his past fusions, the intense struggle to merge not just their strengths, but their very essences. Could his body withstand it again? And with a being like Purunga, no less? A triple fusion. I don't even know if my body can handle it. We have no choice, Guru replied, his tone firm but understanding. Preparations are underway, but there's another problem. That monster out there won't let us summon the dragon easily. You, of all people, know what it takes to call an eternal dragon. The planet, the very atmosphere, reacts to such a surge of power. If the dragon is killed before we can make the wish, it's all over. The weight of Guru's words pressed heavily on Piccolo. His fists clenched, despite the pain shooting through his body. So what's the plan exactly? He asked, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. Guru explained quickly, detailing the use of the evil containment wave to trap their foe and buy time to summon Purunga. His explanation was concise, but left no room for doubt. I've never performed the evil containment wave before, Piccolo admitted, his tone reluctant but determined. But I've seen it done. By Goku, by Roshi. I can retrace the steps if that's what it takes. Instantly, Guru placed a hand on Roshi's shoulder, connecting him to the telepathic link with Piccolo. Roshi's eyes widened in astonishment as the elder's thoughts flowed into his mind. He had heard of Namekian telepathy, but experiencing it firsthand was something else entirely. Still, there was no time to dwell on the novelty.
I'll take it from here, Guru, Roshi said, steadying himself as he addressed Piccolo through the link. Listen closely, Piccolo. There's more to this plan that I need to explain. The Elder might not fully grasp the details of the evil containment wave, but I do. Even as the link connected their minds, the chaotic battlefield raged on. The energy in the air was suffocating, with bursts of violent power crackling like distant thunder. Yet, through the turmoil, Roshi's voice was calm. Deliberate. We're setting up the jar in a specific location, Roshi explained quickly. Your job is to lure that monster to the designated spot, get him there, and then perform the technique.
Where? Piccolo asked, his voice strained as he dodged another incoming blast. He could feel the tension mounting, every second precious. Roshi wasted no time, transmitting the precise location and the details of the setup. You've got to time it perfectly, Roshi continued. If you mess up, there won't be a second chance. This thing doesn't allow for retries. I understand, Piccolo replied firmly. His voice carried both exhaustion and resolve. He had no time for doubt. The stakes were too high. As the telepathic link severed, Piccolo's focus snapped back to his immediate surroundings. Before he could move, a deafening sound erupted just ahead. His eyes widened in shock. At point-blank range, a massive sphere of Hakai energy hovered ominously before him, its violet-black surface crackling with destructive force.
What? Piccolo barely had time to react before the orb surged toward him. Instinct took over. He lunged forward, gripping the sphere with both hands. The sheer weight of the energy sent tremors through his arms, forcing him to his knees. The power was overwhelming, pressing down on him like a tidal wave. Sweat poured from his brow as his muscles strained under the immense pressure.
I was reckless, he muttered through gritted teeth. The Hakai energy felt alive, tugging at him, trying to draw him in. He could feel his strength wavering. The energy wasn't just destructive, it sought to erase him entirely, leaving no trace of his existence. Piccolo roared in defiance, his fingers digging into the energy as if trying to hold it back. His arms trembled, veins bulging as he fought against the sphere's pull. Memories of Frieza flashed through his mind, of the tyrant's destructive energy and the impossible odds he had faced before. But this was worse. This was death on a cosmic scale. No, not like this, Piccolo growled, summoning every ounce of his willpower. He opened his mouth wide. With a primal scream, a beam of concentrated ki erupted from his throat, slamming into the Hakai sphere. The force of the blast collided with the orb, creating a blinding explosion of light and energy. The ground beneath Piccolo cracked, and the air around him seemed to ripple under the strain. He poured everything he had into the beam, refusing to let the Hakai sphere consume him. As his energy surged, he felt his body being pushed to its limits. His power wasn't just rising, it was evolving. Survival demanded it. With a final earth-shattering roar,
Piccolo's ki pierced through the sphere. A massive hole ripped through the center of the Hakai energy, and the sphere began to destabilize. In a flash of violent energy, it dissipated, vanishing into nothingness. Piccolo collapsed to his knees, steam rising from his body. His breaths were heavy and labored, his chest heaving as he tried to recover. His once pristine gi was tattered, and his green skin was marred with burns and bruises. Smoke swirled around him, and for a moment all was quiet. From the distance, a slow, mocking clap echoed. Piccolo looked up to see Azazel striding toward him, his expression cold and amused. The being's hands were clasped behind his back, his posture exuding confidence.
"You never cease to surprise me, mortal," Azazel said with a smirk. His voice was smooth, almost condescending. "But you should know by now, defiance only makes this more entertaining for me." Piccolo struggled to his feet, his body shaking, but his resolve unbroken. His eyes locked onto Azazel's, and though he was battered and beaten, there was no fear in his gaze, only determination. Piccolo wiped the blood from his mouth, his hand trembling as he glared at Azazel through a haze of dust and molten debris. The battlefield was chaos incarnate. Namek's surface groaned and buckled beneath their feet, fissures splitting the ground as lava spewed into the air in fiery jets. The once peaceful planet now looked like a living hellscape, scarred by their unrelenting battle. Piccolo's clothes hung in tatters, his body battered and bruised, yet his spirit refused to waver. He stood tall, every fiber of his being radiating defiance. The plan hinged on him, and he knew it. They had one last desperate gambit, and it all depended on baiting Azazel into the exact spot where the trap was set. But how could he bait a being as powerful and cunning as Azazel? The demon could sense ki with surgical precision, rendering stealth meaningless. Elder Guru, frail and ancient, sat helplessly on the battlefield's fringes, his hover chair barely able to keep him upright. Though the Elder provided critical telepathic support, he was in no condition to fight. That left the task to Piccolo, Master Roshi, and anyone else foolish or brave enough to risk their lives. Azazel took a step forward, his long shadow stretching across the cracked ground. His gleaming red eyes were filled with predatory hunger. "You have the defiance of a cornered beast, Piccolo," he said, his voice icy and detached. "But resistance is pointless. Show me whatever pitiful trick you're so desperate to play." Piccolo straightened his stance, wiping more blood from his chin. "For a so-called deity, you're just an overconfident jerk," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. Azazel's lips curled into a snarl, his tone taking on a dark amusement. "Arrogant insect. It's not overconfidence if I can back it up." Nearby, Master Roshi hovered in Android 18's grip, the two carefully positioned just outside Azazel's field of vision. Roshi clutched a reinforced clay jar tightly against his chest, its simple appearance hiding its true purpose. The jar was a fusion of old-world mysticism and Bulma's cutting-edge engineering. A specialized seal cloaked its energy signature, ensuring Azazel wouldn't sense it until it was too late. Roshi's heart pounded in his chest like a war drum. This wasn't just a battle. It was a gamble, a do-or-die moment. "It has to be done in the middle of the fight," Roshi murmured, his voice shaky but resolved. "Azazel's too sharp. He'll never fall for anything less than perfect execution." Piccolo exploded forward in a burst of speed, engaging Azazel in hand-to-hand combat. Their strikes sent deafening shockwaves across the battlefield, shattering the ruins of old Namekian villages. The ground beneath them trembled with each collision, massive craters forming in the wake of their blows. Azazel's fist connected with Piccolo's face in a devastating backhand, sending blood spraying into the air. Piccolo used the momentum to fling himself backward, skidding across a field of jagged rocks. He coughed, his chest heaving with exertion, but he kept moving. He had to lure Azazel. Azazel followed in a blur of motion, his intent clear. "Running already?" the demon taunted. "Pathetic." "Master Roshi," Android 18 hissed, her sharp eyes tracking the chaos below. "It's now or never. He's locked onto Piccolo." Roshi nodded, his face grim. "Let's move." With that, Android 18 shot across the sky, weaving through the battlefield's smoking chaos. Ki blasts whizzed past them, shaking the air as they narrowly avoided the destruction. Every move they made was deliberate, designed to keep Azazel's attention solely on Piccolo. Back on the ground, Elder Guru remained in his hover chair, his eyes half closed in concentration. Using his telekinesis, he began subtly moving debris across the battlefield. Cracked pillars and shattered boulders shifted as if nudged by an unseen hand, forming a rough pathway. The narrow corridor of rubble steered Azazel toward the exact spot they had prepared.
Azazel noticed the movement, but dismissed it as a desperate attempt to slow him down. His focus remained locked on Piccolo, whose aura flickered weakly as he fought to stay upright. Piccolo staggered, clutching his ribs as if he were seconds from collapse. "Is that really all you've got?" he rasped, his voice deliberately mocking. Azazel's eyes narrowed, his pride prickling at the insult. "Still clinging to your bravado, I see." He sneered and surged forward, closing the distance in an instant. The demon struck Piccolo with a vicious elbow to the chest, nearly caving it in. Piccolo let out a strangled cry as the force of the blow sent him hurtling into a pile of broken stone columns. Each massive slab crashed around him, half burying his battered body. Azazel landed a short distance away, confident the fight was over, but Piccolo snarled, pushing himself to his feet with a grim determination that refused to die. His battered form was barely holding together, yet his aura flared with a dangerous intensity. "Come closer, demon!" Piccolo wheezed, his voice low but defiant. "I'll show you one last move." Azazel's grin twisted into something darker, his voice dripping with mockery. "Amusing. You barely stand, Namekian, and yet you dare threaten me?" Each step he took forward was deliberate, his boots crunching into the scorched ground. Dust and oppressive heat swirled in the air, and the earth split further beneath his immense power. The sheer weight of his aura threatened to collapse the battlefield entirely. Above them, Android 18 and Roshi circled carefully, their focus locked on the prepared location. The spot was perfect, a loose patch of ground flanked by crumbled Namekian pillars, with enough debris to conceal their trap. As Azazel stepped onto the precise area, Roshi signaled Android 18. She adjusted her flight path and descended low, both of them touching down behind a shattered wall for cover. Piccolo stood firm in the demon's path, his body trembling but unyielding. He raised both hands, forming the stance for a massive ki blast, yet no energy gathered in his palms. It was a bluff, one that had to work. His gaze darted toward the concealed jar, now nestled behind the rubble where Roshi crouched, staff in hand, chanting softly under his breath. Azazel's eyes narrowed. Suspicion flickered across his face, but he dismissed the lack of energy buildup as Piccolo's weakness. With a dark burst of aura, Azazel vanished. In an instant, he reappeared directly in front of Piccolo, his fist cocked back and ready to strike. Piccolo braced himself, his teeth clenched in pain and determination, but his eyes flicked over the demon's shoulder, locking onto Roshi's position. "This is your end, Namekian!" Azazel snarled, his punch slicing through the air with savage precision. Piccolo crossed his arms to block the strike, the force of the blow reverberating through his entire body. A guttural yell escaped his lips as pain surged through him like fire. He held his ground by sheer willpower, channeling every ounce of his remaining ki to absorb the attack. It was now or never. With a sudden roar, Piccolo slammed both palms into Azazel's chest, unleashing a burst of raw power that sent the demon hurtling backward. Azazel landed directly on the precise patch of ground they had prepared, but as his body skidded across the broken terrain, Azazel's gaze snapped to the side. His keen senses caught the faint flicker of the jar's concealed aura as the Mafuba energy activated. You dare! Azazel's voice boomed, rage and alarm colliding in his tone. His aura flared black and violent, arcs of energy whipping through the air as he began to move. He pushed off the ground, attempting to leap free of the ceiling zone. Before he could escape, Roshi sprang from his hiding spot. "Lightning flash, surprise!" the old master bellowed, thrusting his hands forward. A crackling surge of electric energy erupted from Roshi's palms, striking Azazel mid-leap. The current wrapped around the demon's limbs like chains, binding him in place. Sparks exploded in every direction, and the air smelled of ozone. The technique had a price. Roshi himself was caught in the feedback, the energy paralyzing his own body as well. Both combatants stood locked in place, unable to move without breaking the electric bind. Azazel thrashed against the hold, his face contorted in fury. "You think this parlor trick can stop me?" he roared, his voice shaking the ground. "Piccolo!" Roshi shouted, his voice strained from the effort. "Now! I can't hold him for long!" Piccolo saw his opening and didn't hesitate. "Roshi, let go when I say," he yelled, his voice sharp and commanding. Ignoring his searing wounds, Piccolo lunged forward, his aura exploding in a blinding mix of green and gold. His hands began to weave the intricate motions of the Mafuba, pulling in every ounce of his energy. Mafuba! Huh! The containment wave erupted from Piccolo's palms, a spiraling vortex of green and white energy. The twister snaked across the battlefield, latching onto Azazel's torso, with an unrelenting grip.
Azazel's roar of defiance echoed across Namek. His muscles bulged as he fought against the containment energy, but Roshi's lightning bind held him in place. From his hover chair, Elder Guru made his final contribution. Focusing his telekinesis, he sent chunks of debris sliding across the ground, blocking Azazel's feet and cutting off any chance of a sudden escape. The containment energy coiled tighter, dragging Azazel inch by inch toward the open jar. The ground quaked beneath him as his dark aura flared wildly, sending black lightning crackling across the battlefield. You dare defy me? Azazel bellowed, his voice a mix of terror and unyielding fury. I am a primordial demon god. Nothing holds me. Azazel's furious roar was drowned out as the swirling energy forced him against the jar's rim. His once mighty form began to twist and distort, collapsing into a spiraling vortex of shadow and light. The jar trembled violently, its mouth glowing white-hot as it consumed his spiritual essence. Master Roshi, his hands still crackling with residual energy from the lightning flash surprise, released the technique at the last possible moment. He collapsed backward onto the rubble, his chest heaving as exhaustion claimed him. It's up to you now, he muttered weakly, struggling to keep his eyes open. Piccolo bellowed with one last surge of strength, pouring every remaining ounce of ki into the Mafuba. The swirling containment wave tightened like a vice, compressing Azazel's dark energy further and forcing him down into the jar. With a resounding snap, the lid slammed shut. The talisman on the jar flared to life, sealing it with a thunderous crash that echoed across the battlefield. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The chaotic battlefield was eerily still. Lava bubbled in the fissures, and steam hissed from the ground. But the monstrous, suffocating aura that had filled the air moments before was gone. The jar rattled ominously, faint cracks already beginning to spread across its surface. But for now, it held. Piccolo dropped to his knees, sweat pouring down his face. His vision blurred, and his muscles burned as though set aflame. Each breath he took felt heavier than the last. Did we actually seal him? He rasped, his voice barely audible. Roshi lay slumped nearby, wincing with every twitch of his body. Android 18 rushed to his side, gently lifting him from the rubble. Her sharp eyes darted over his injuries, assessing the damage. Master Roshi, stay with me, she urged, her voice uncharacteristically soft. For a long, tense moment, no one spoke. Finally, Elder Guru floated closer in his hover chair, his ancient features etched with both relief and exhaustion. His presence, it is gone, the Elder said, his voice trembling with emotion. You have done it. Azazel is sealed. Piccolo bowed his head, his body swaying from the effort of remaining upright. We'd better make this count, he muttered, his tone grim, because if that monster breaks free again, I don't think we can pull this off a second time. Before anyone could respond, a deep, bone-chilling sound cut through the air. Crack. Piccolo's head shot up, his blood running cold. His eyes locked onto the jar, where a jagged fissure had just splintered across its surface. The container trembled violently, the cracks spreading like webbing. What? Piccolo shouted, his voice filled with both disbelief and fury. That monster, he's already trying to escape. I knew he was strong, but this soon? The jar rattled again, the cracks widening as a faint, malevolent energy seeped from within. It wasn't even a minute since the seal had been completed, and yet the sheer might of Azazel's power was proving too great to contain. Android 18 turned, her voice cutting through the rising panic. What are you waiting for? Summon the dragon, now! The Dragon Balls had been gathered earlier in preparation for this exact moment. The golden orbs shimmered faintly in the chaos, their energy pulsing in rhythm with the planets trembling. Wasting no time, Piccolo staggered to his feet, his voice raw as he cried out, Porunga, by your name, I summon you forth. The sky above them darkened instantly, the last traces of sunlight swallowed by thick, stormy clouds. Thunder rumbled ominously as the air grew heavy with divine power. A moment later, the mighty eternal dragon of Namek, Porunga, emerged, his massive muscular form coiled above them, glowing red eyes piercing the gloom like twin beacons. Who has summoned me? Porunga's voice boomed, shaking the very air. State your wish, the first of three. Piccolo didn't hesitate. He raised his hand, his voice resolute. Porunga, grant me your power. Fuse yourself with me, as Shenron once did. Porunga's glowing eyes narrowed slightly as he considered the wish. Are you certain of this request? He asked, his deep voice filled with weight. This wish will cancel your remaining two. Piccolo's breathing was labored, but his determination was unwavering. Yes, he said, his voice firm. I understand the cost. Very well, Porunga replied,
his tone carrying the finality of a divine decree. Know this. This wish will render the Dragon Balls inactive for 1,000 years.
From the edge of the battlefield, Chi-Chi, who had arrived with the others moments earlier, called out desperately, "We're certain. Do it now, before it's too late." Her voice cracked with urgency, tears glistening in her eyes. Purunga's massive body began to glow with an intense golden light. The radiant energy surged outward, enveloping Piccolo as the two prepared to merge. The sky above erupted with energy as Purunga's immense form surged toward Piccolo, his glowing eyes locked on the Namekian. The dragon's power crackled in the air, a divine force unlike anything the others had ever felt. Then, something unexpected happened. Purunga's colossal body began to dissolve into radiant streams of golden light, which swirled around Piccolo before rushing toward him in a concentrated beam. The energy shot straight into Piccolo's mouth, forcing his body to convulse as it absorbed the eternal dragon's essence. His muscles seized, and his eyes widened in shock as Purunga's power fused with his very being. It wasn't just a transfer of strength, it was a union of souls. Piccolo felt the weight of ancient wisdom, power, and responsibility crashing into him all at once. The tendrils of light binding his body dissolved as the fusion completed, leaving Piccolo suspended mid-air. His body glowed with an intense, blinding light that spread outward, engulfing the battlefield and beyond. Purunga's final words echoed through the heavens. "Our power is one. Wield it wisely, warrior."
Then, Purunga's form faded entirely, leaving Piccolo as the sole bearer of his immense might. In that instant, a massive surge of ki erupted from Piccolo, shooting high into the sky and beyond. The energy was so immense that it seemed to pierce through space itself, creating a ripple effect that bent reality like a fragmented mirror. It was as if a miniature dimension had been born from the sheer force of his transformation.
The ground beneath them trembled violently, fissures spreading like spiderwebs across Namek's surface. Lava erupted from the cracks, and the air thickened under the overwhelming pressure of Piccolo's newfound power. If not for Piccolo's meticulous control, the planet would have been obliterated by the sheer intensity radiating from his body. As the blinding light finally dimmed, the Z-Fighters could make out Piccolo's new form. Blue lightning crackled around him, illuminating the battlefield with arcs of raw energy. His once green skin had turned a pristine white, glowing faintly in the dim light of the ruptured sky. His eyes retained their sharp intensity, but the most striking features were the changes to his physique. Spiked protrusions now jutted from his back and elbows, reminiscent of Omega Shenron's draconic features. What truly stood out, however, were the 7 glowing Dragon Balls embedded in his chest, each pulsing faintly with energy. They were not just a decoration, they seemed alive, radiating a divine presence that made even the most powerful warriors nearby falter. Piccolo descended slowly to the ground, his aura stabilizing into a radiant fusion of orange and red, overlaid with streaks of blue lightning. Intricate patterns, almost like sacred etchings, adorned his skin, glowing faintly as if imbued with celestial power. The Z-Fighters watched in awe, their knees buckling under the sheer magnitude of his ki. Even Android 18, who prided herself on her composure, found herself clenching her fists to remain steady. Elder Guru's hover chair creaked under the strain of the intense energy.
Azazel, still hovering a short distance away, observed the transformation with growing interest. For the first time, his ever-present grin faltered, his crimson eyes narrowing as he assessed Piccolo's new form. "Interesting," he murmured, his voice quieter than usual. "It seems I've underestimated you, Namekian." But Azazel's arrogance remained unbroken. Though he could sense the dramatic increase in Piccolo's power, he dismissed it as little more than a spike in ki. To him, it was a temporary nuisance, nothing he couldn't crush with a fraction of his own strength.
Azazel failed to see the true danger before him, blinded by his hubris. He couldn't comprehend the magnitude of what Piccolo had become. Piccolo, now fully in control of his transformed state, opened his eyes. His gaze was calm but commanding, his voice steady as he addressed the battlefield. "This form needs a name," he said, his tone carrying an air of finality. He glanced down at his altered body, observing the draconic elements fused with his Namekian heritage. "A dragon and a Namekian," he paused, considering the combination with a faint smirk. "What should I call myself? I know." He raised his head, his newly radiant aura flaring briefly. "Omega Piccolo," he declared. The ground seemed to tremble at the proclamation. In that very moment, Omega Piccolo was born. And that's it for today's episode, guys. If you watched to the end, then that could be an indication that you enjoy the series. So please leave a like on the video. Thank you and take care.